Here. So attendees can start filtering in and we are.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Today is Wednesday, November 9th, 2022. I am Ed Hammer, Assistant Attorney General, and I represent the State Board of Land Commissioners. This afternoon, the board has been in executive session to discuss the matter notice for executive session, specifically the large-scale REPI opportunity in El Paso, Fremont, and Pueblo counties. The discussion was authorized under 246402(3)(a)(1) of the Colorado Revised Statutes, and the discussion was limited to the authorization. No decisions were made in executive session. The board is now back in open session and can proceed with the rest of its agenda.
As we've noted, all 5 commissioners are present. We are going to take about a 5-minute or so break. We had a working lunch. We'd like to kind of reset here. So why don't we go on a quick break, come back a little bit around 5 minutes or so after 1. Thanks.
We are good to go.
All right. Welcome again. We have come out of our recent executive session, followed for folks just joining us. All 5 commissioners of the land board are present. Commissioner Clark, however, had to step out of the room for a few minutes, but she'll be joining us shortly. We spent our morning talking affordable housing, and it was a terrific conversation, and then got to see a site that we helped to partner on and collaborate with just down the block for us. So with that, we're ready to, we do have kind of a full agenda all afternoon, so we're ready to move forward with that. First, I don't believe we got any public comment related to anything not on our agenda on email. But we do want to now open up the line to any public comment not related to anything on our agenda with folks who might be zooming in.
So, folks, if you're listening and you'd like to address the board on a matter that's not on our agenda for today, use the raise hand feature on your screen and we'll let you address the board. I don't have any hands, Commissioner.
Okay, let's go ahead and move forward with Director Ryan. Announcements?
No announcements.
No announcements. And do we have Vanessa online?
We do.
I'm
Let's
here.
see it.
Hi, our DNR report.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you, commissioners. My name is Vanessa Mazal, and I'm a policy advisor with the Department of Natural Resources, here to provide an update on behalf of our executive director, Dan Gibbs. Starting with the executive director's office. We have recently concluded interviews for the open legislative director position to replace Alice Forgan, who will not be available is going on maternity leave during the legislative session, and then is moving on after that. And so she is currently in a temporary capacity as the assistant director of Parks and Wildlife, but we will look forward to having someone new on board in time for the legislative session. Also, we are starting to interview for the open assistant director for energy innovation position, and also expect to be announcing very soon our tribal liaison position, which is a new position that was approved last year. I will move on to some pretty extensive budget updates. The governor did submit his budget to the joint budget committee, and ultimately DNR, sorry, lost train of thought. DNR is expected to, or we requested roughly $400 million for DNR programs and operations and those of our divisions, which is great news. In addition, the Department of Revenue also announced released its preliminary estimates for severance tax estimates for the month of October. And this is the third highest severance tax revenue on record since 2004, roughly $117.8 million and a total of $117.8 million will be allocated amongst the severance tax ops fund and base fund going forward. And I apologize, I got caught off guard, everyone. So let me just quickly take a moment to compose myself. There we go. I'm ready for you. Okay, moving on. 2 division updates. The Colorado State Forest Service wanted us to let you know that the application period closed for the Forest Health Wildfire Risk and Mitigation Fund, or the FORWRM Fund, in mid-October. The fund will distribute roughly $15 million across 17,000 acres in addressing our wildfire mitigation needs. This fund is going to be drawn down and shifted to general funds, to the general fund going forward. The Colorado Water Conservation Fund or Board, excuse me, quite a lot going on there. The budget approved the separation of the director position from the Colorado River Commissioner position. If approved, proposed rather, and if approved, Becky Mitchell will continue to remain in the Colorado River Commissioner position, while Lauren Reese will likely steer the ship as a new director search gets underway. The Bureau of Reclamation announced that it will be allocating $60 million from the Infrastructure Act to complete the Arkansas Valley Conduit, which is a pipeline that will deliver water to communities east of Pueblo. Additionally, it also issued notice of a supplemental environmental impact statement to consider changing interim guidelines for the operations of Glen Canyon and Hoover Dams to allow releases from Glen Canyon Dam to go below $7 million, which is not currently available. Finally, simultaneously today or concurrently, CWCB is hosting the first ever Colorado Landscape Summit at Metro State University, which is going to explore landscape and water resiliency in the state. Moving on to the Division of Water Resources, one significant announcement there, which is that the state, through the Attorney General's office, has reached a temporary settlement agreement in large-scale litigation that has been ongoing between the states of New Mexico, Texas, and Colorado. And the federal government has 45 days, will have 45 days after the settlement agreement is submitted to the court to oppose or to file its opposition to the settlement agreement. At the Division of Parks and Wildlife, hunting season is very much in full swing, and it's an all hands on deck affair over there. They are also beginning to hire several land use staff that were approved as part of the 2022 and 23 budget. And additionally are gearing up to initiate statewide conservation, recreation, and climate planning, as well as a habitat connectivity plan. Those efforts are getting underway right now, and GOCO is a partner in the statewide planning initiative and has issued an RFP for a consultant to lead or begin to get that statewide planning, conservation planning effort off the ground. Let's see, we've got quite a few announcements on the federal land use side, but I think since we've addressed many of those in the past, I will simply just reiterate that there's a lot going on in terms of federal land use planning. I think of particular interest to this group is that the BLM announced that they are expecting to release a final plan for the Eastern Colorado region that will provide direction on the administration and the management of federal minerals and lands, really throughout the entire eastern part of the state. And also the Western Governors Association has initiated has started to convene a task force, as has been done in the past, to look across states in its range-wide planning effort to address the needs of greater sage-grouse. And let's see, I think that sort of gets us to where we need to be. Oh, couple of other federal updates for you. I just wanted to make sure, since in case you missed it, that President Biden used his executive authority to establish a new national monument at Camp Hale, which is the former training grounds for the 10th Mountain Division, and also is a really has a lot of other significance as a historic and cultural and landscape. And so that's exciting stuff. Governor Polis, who we're excited to learn will continue to is going to continue to serve in that role, was able to attend that ceremony, and it was quite an affair. I think that's it, unless there are additional questions. I'm happy to provide any answers. And I really apologize for stumbling at the beginning there, but I think I'm on track, and I promise I'm with you now.
You're doing fabulous. I never have that experience, but it must be challenging.
I had my notes out of order because I was on a call right immediately before I joined you, but I think well, anyway, I think we can leave it at that. I will also mention just that that DNR and also the governor's staff will be starting to pay attention to what's happening in the upcoming lame duck session at the federal level. We expect quite a few potential proposals surrounding land use and wildfire mitigation, water administration, to be making their way through Congress this session. So it'll be a busy season. Any questions?
Any questions? I don't think so. Thank you, Vanessa. We appreciate your time with us.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity.
Go back to all your good work. Okay, we're going to move on to business items and start out with the REPI opportunity that we have been discussing for now several board meetings, and Assistant Director Greg Orr.
Good afternoon, commissioners. As Commissioner Scanlon just said, this is a conversation that's been ongoing for over a year now. But we last met in September, and at that meeting, we're touring various properties that will be subject to this initiative if we move ahead. The commissioners asked us to come back and investigate some specific questions and come back with some hopefully answers. And so we've done that. I want to start at a high level. Just to reiterate, from staff's perspective, we're really interested in this opportunity. We think it's unique in that it's an opportunity for the State Land Board to dispose of some property in a way that would ensure its permanent protection through conservation easements, but also allow us to achieve some of the strategic financial outcomes that we generally work towards. So keep that in mind. Those, I think, are the two sort of big takeaways or big objectives out of this effort. We spent executive session. You asked us to come back with, I think, 5 additional information on 5 points. The first one was a financial analysis under various scenarios of the potential transactions, and we covered that in executive session. So I just wanted to flag it for the record, but I'm not going to go back into that. The others were share a little bit more about what our management objectives were or are for these various properties. A discussion of the pros and cons around conservation easements. A little discussion about the context for these properties, the ecological and conservation context. Put the discussion into a portfolio context. So I will do all of that. Happy to take questions as I go. And then we do have some of the project partners here. We have representatives of Palmer, Land Conservancy, TNC, and our lessee on the Bohart are here in the audience behind me. We also have a representative of TPF on the phone, so joining us by video. And then we've left time for board discussion, but again, I'm happy to take questions as we go. So as a reminder, the properties in question are the Bohart Ranch, which these yellow circles hopefully are highlighting these properties. And this is the order we toured them in September. So the Bohart Ranch, then we went over to the Edison. I think this is right. Then we went up to Big Spruce. I got that wrong. But then we went to, we looked at the land, state trust land on the south side of Schriever Space Force Base. And then we saw Aiken Canyon and we saw Table Mountain. So those are the properties that are part of this larger proposal. Segueing into management objectives, it was really an interesting question in some ways to answer. The easiest answer, I started with the easiest answer. The Bohart Ranch, as one of our larger ranches, is subject to an asset management plan. And I think you've all seen those. I included the Bohart, not that I hope you didn't try to read it all, but I included it in case you wanted to sort of look at sections of it. The asset management plan for the Bohart Ranch which was just updated a couple, 2 or 3 years ago. And I think those plans really gave us a clear set of management objectives, or at least they're intended to. And if you looked at it, I hope that's what you found. But if I were to boil it down, this is a property that we manage with a high standard of care because of the natural values, unique natural values that exist. It was carefully leased to a lessee that we think shares those values. That's the Nature Conservancy, and then they sublease it to the actual operator, which is the Tanner family. So this is a property where standard of care probably comes before any other objective on property. Partly as a result, if you looked at the plan, what is probably highlighted is the annual return on investment is near zero. It's not actually zero, but it's less than 1/2 of 1%. But that's the result of the only use of the property being agriculture, and a very thoughtfully managed agricultural operation. There's no recreation use, there's no mining use, there's no oil and gas, there's no other lease use on it. There is an airstrip that is used by the Air Force Academy, but that's not a right of way, and we were paid for that right of way 20, 30 years ago when we actually established it. So that's the only other use, and you've seen that as our stop. So I think reading, I don't think it literally says this. It says it in a slightly different way, but that this is a property that if the board thought disposal was appropriate, we would have accomplished, and we could dispose of it to a conservation-minded buyer, oriented buyer. We would have met our objectives from a stewardship standpoint, and we would be able to reinvest the proceeds at higher returns, either in other properties or. So any questions about that? Commissioner Chavez, you often actually read every page. We give you minutes, we point to questions.
No, I'm good.
The next 3 properties I grouped because I do think they fall into a general category that represents a lot of our lands, which are they're leased for grazing. We're working to optimize grazing revenue, and we do that really by managing them under statute, which says every 10 years that we advertise the public bid and we get competitive bids. I think we did on Big Springs the last time that was available. That is a way we can get more than our standard grazing rate. We try to minimize our investment in the properties. Most of the improvements, if not all, are owned by the grazing lessees. We will make efforts to generate recreational income if it doesn't conflict with the grazing use, and one Big Springs for sure, and Edison. Justin, correct me if I'm wrong, is Edison in the PAD? No, okay, so only in this case, Big Springs is in the public access program, so we're getting a little revenue from leasing it to CPW. And then what I said is they're subject to our normal standard of care. And I don't mean to diminish what that is. I think it's relatively high in the, or quite high in the universe of grazing leases, but all of the normal requirements and stipulations that are contained in our grazing leases apply to these properties. They're inspected at least every 5 years, if not more often, by our district managers. So that's I think they all fall into that relatively similar bucket. And any questions about those? So the third one is Aiken Canyon, and this one is truly unique. It is subject to a 99-year lease to the Nature Conservancy. I think there's about 65 years or 60 plus years left to run. It's managed as a outdoor conservation area. And we did stop, many of you stopped with us on the way back into Colorado Springs to see this, but that lease really precludes any other uses on the property. In a way, it's almost as if it's subject to a conservation easement. And therefore any additional uses, so it's a very high standard of care. And there's really no opportunity for any additional use on that property from our perspective to lease it to others. And there's a long way to run. And then Table Mountain is probably the most complicated in the sense that it's quite large. It's again leased to optimize grazing revenue, but there are two of them within the area we're talking about under refuge, existing solid minerals extraction operations that generate significant annual lease revenue. Again, in the heading under the heading of grazing, we don't invest much in the improvements on the property. They're primarily owned by the grazing lessee. It is in the PAP, so we do generate some recreational income, and then again, subject to a normal standard of care under both the solid minerals leases and the grazing leases. They both have, they all have stipulations about what the lessees can and can't do and what we expect them to do to maintain the property. So that was our best shot at giving you a sense of the management objectives on the properties. Is that Commissioner Thobe, I think it might have been your question in September, which on the spot. Does that address what you were perhaps interested in? Okay. So segueing to the pros and cons of conservation easements. First of all, a conservation easement by general definition would permanently limit the use of the land in order to protect conservation values. That's the way we would think of it, certainly. And these pros and cons are a combination of conversations with real estate professionals, brokers, staff's personal experience. I think I actually also shared them with representatives of TPL and TNC to see what their thoughts were. So it's an informal survey of experts, but I feel pretty good about it. I would say the pros are at least fivefold. You've created permanent protection in perpetuity for a set of conservation values that have been determined to be important. It will prevent, in all likelihood, or severely limit future development. So speaking of residential development, you might preserve one or two development envelopes on a large property, but for the most part, you're foregoing any opportunity to do development at a more intense scale. Almost certainly would protect agricultural operations. A lot of times done, and this was something I hadn't thought about, they will be done by landowners or in place by landowners who want to stay on the ranch. Longtime owners want to stay on the ranch, and they need capital to continue to operate, invest in improvements. And this is perhaps the best way for them to raise that capital. So it's going to be reinvested in the property. And then to a certain extent, estate planning, as agricultural property becomes more valuable and tax issues come into play when it's trying to pass from one generation to the next. This is a way to reduce the basis in a property so that the taxable value upon death and transfer is lower. I'd welcome any thoughts on any we may have missed. That was our list of slightly less than half a dozen sort of benefits or pros to the conservation easement.
Can I ask you a quick, when you were, I was just curious about the lease that you were saying is that Aiken Canyon?
Yes.
That essentially kind of operates like a conservation easement. I'm just kind of curious about.
Why did we say that?
No, or just like, why wouldn't that be an option too,
As a
I'm just trying to compare like a long-term lease like that kind of functions in that way, but is.
to somebody using it specifically to the landlord or just in general to anybody?
Well, to the, yeah.
The landlord. Okay. I welcome Bill or others to jump in. You know, I look at, we have a handful of long-term leases. Somewhere, and by long-term, I mean for agricultural uses or open space, and 25 years to, in a couple cases, 10 years. We have found those to be really imperfect instruments. Try to think of all the reasons, and we've been trying to move away from them. One reason is and we talked about this in the Chico Basin Ranch at length. You on the board, the interests of the user and the board can diverge so greatly over a period of 25 years that I think it really almost sets it's just right, in my opinion, for conflict or really difficult conversations. I think you remember on the Chico Basin Ranch, the current lessee has said, well, 3 generations of the family have grown up on this ranch. It would be, if you took it away, it would be like losing, the family ranch, and that's difficult, but that's not out of the business of establishing family ranches per se.
I guess I was thinking in this term that it's the Nature Conservancy, maybe it's just a matter of granting an easement versus paying for, I mean, either way, the value of the land is coming down because there's a use
Yes.
restriction essentially.
Yes.
So it's just, are they paying us for this restriction or?
I would say, perhaps we could negotiate that. I would say
I
we
was just-
certainly did not get the same level of compensation for the lease
Right.
that we would had we, I don't think, negotiated a conservation.
This actually,
Introduce yourself.
I'm sorry, Matt Moorhead with the Nature Conservancy. The Aiken Canyon lease was another lease of Old Mesa. Done in the very early 1990s. That was a time, and actually the goal from a conservation perspective is to acquire the properties outright. It'd be simple, but for various, it was early in the days of conservation awareness in the state of Colorado, politically, transactionally, that presented challenges. To do that, the compromise was the 99-year lease. For all intents and purposes, the Nature Conservancy paid fair market value at the time the lease was conducted for 99 years. From a conservation perspective, I would say our assessment of this, I know this for the thing, what I'm saying from the state's perspective, from the conservation perspective, we essentially paid fair market value, but we didn't have a permanent solution. And yes, 99 years, it's not going to be my problem. But at the same time, we paid fair market value without that solution. If we're going to do that, we'd rather just have the solution. If that makes sense.
I'm just always trying to, yeah, anyway, I'm just trying to make sure that we really have all options on the table and like.
The other issue I'll point out, and I think you've seen it, is when we put long-term arrangements in place on state trust land, especially if Aiken Canyon is an example, and it includes the right to public access. By the time that lease is running course, and the term we use is politically captured, essentially any ability to take that back and turn it into something else is, in my experience, that distinguished. You're not going to take it back and say, well, it's going to be housing development now. You know, it was open space for 100 years, but things have changed. So we're almost, maybe to your point, we're extinguishing rights just like a conservation easement was. It's not like the lease let us get something back at the end that the conservation easement did.
I think I'd just add from a term perspective, the world changes, the facts on the ground change, the discovery of resources change, and the shorter term gives us the ability to meet our mission better, right? To find new uses that can generate revenue, to discover new resources that need stewarding, and so, you know, trying to predict what the world will look like 99 years from now, I think it's kind of a fool's errand and is not in our best interest. If our goal really is that ought to be permanently conserved, let's get it to an organization to own the title to it and execute that mission. I just think it's a different mission than our mission, and we need to remain nimble and flexible with our assets to be good fiduciaries.
So on the con side, about the same number of ideas or concepts. Diminishes market value, we don't mean at the point in time are compensated for selling easement. We mean that we believe there's a lower appreciation rate for projects that have been eased than there are projects that don't have that restriction on it. So increase in value over time going forward has been, we believe, diminished. It really eliminates known and unknown revenue opportunities. So you may know you're giving up the possibility of solid minerals, but you don't know what you don't know. And actually, you're talking about this, somebody identified solar energy development. You know, if you'd written a conservation easement 20 years ago, you might not have known that you were giving up the opportunity to, in fact, some of our neighbors down in Pueblo County who they're coming and talk to us about it and their concerns about us doing it, gave out the opportunity when they were on conservation easements on their needed land 20 or 25 years ago. And we would not have known. So you don't know what you don't know. And Commissioner Clark, I can't, I'm not comparing these to other alternatives right now, because you could argue, well, if you sold it, you gave it up to it, and you're correct. I'm just saying, an easement, you're giving up some things you may not be fully aware of. It certainly complicates property management to some extent, because you have a land trust holding the easement, and that they are now going to be doing inspections on the property and weighing in on management practices that previously were solely the landowner's concern. Complicates disposal, and maybe overlapping with 5 and 6 a little bit, in the sense that I think there's a smaller buyer pool. I think there are some people who just don't want to buy an east property. They don't want to deal. They want all of the options that they're going to purchase, and it complicates lending. There are some lenders who do and don't understand easements and may or may not lend on a property and the conditions. So it just makes disposal likely more complicated in the future. And I entertain anybody's thoughts if you've been involved with these personal experience. Again, the landlord doesn't have a lot of them. And so I can't say this is I can't speak from personal experience, but this is the best assessment of others who were able to put together. The conservation context, and I might invite one of our partners to speak to this. This would help us with the map. We ended up collaborating on a map, but Matt Moorhead stood on this property with you all and made this beautiful soliloquy about how important is Table Mountain, how important the role it played in connectivity. And it turns out he's right. When he made us,
You sound
he made us
surprised.
tell the story. So we put all the properties on here. So there's the Bohart, there's Big Springs, Edison, Schriever, Aiken Canyon, and Table Mountain. And the blue is state trust land. See where we play a role. The gray, and I'm having a little trouble, I might be colorblind or might be dark. Gray, this is public land, it's really CPW land, and I see this kind of a maroon on here. They're primarily state wildlife areas. There's one here, there's one here, there's one here. The federal land, we combine BLM and USFS, so they're all green. And then the brown is conservation easements in place. And the reason I'm teasing Matt a little bit is, at first I thought we might be able to overlay some biological values and species values, and we could tell you a better story about how these lands play a role, and we weren't able to do that. Data was in too many places. But I do think it seems we can all interpret this the way we'd like. I do see the point that Matt Moorhead was making. This piece of Table Mountain land, our state trust land here, is right between Fort Carson and BLM and USFS land here. On the south side are the conservation easements that I think Matt mentioned earlier that were part of an earlier REPI effort on the south side of Fort Carson. And when you're done with that, you're not very far from the Arkansas River and the sort of continuity that would generally exist along that walk, that major drainage. So these do certainly appear to fill in that sort of connectivity role. As you get more out here, out in this direction, certainly the Bohart is a piece of a larger block of either serve. This is the Army, the Rebel Army. So that is, yeah, the Army Depot. We're actually getting some of the BLM land in here in the land for land in the new exchange. So some of this will become blue. So conserving this certainly can be seen as a desirable outcome and providing continuity again down to the south. So that's the information we were able to put together. Matt,
Sure, I'll just add a few things. Again, Matt Moorhead with the Nature Conservancy. So that unfortunately the data we weren't able to sort of concisely get to match up with everybody is also a data set that has been analyzing connectivity and intact landscapes, not only in the context of what is intact and providing relatively healthy, relatively high quality natural habitat systems today. It's a data set that also looks in the face of a changing climate, in the face of continued drought. What does conservation need to look like? Not just today, what does conservation need to look like in years to allow for adaptation, to allow for essentially movement and transport from natural areas to natural areas for, again, long-term resilience and sustainability. So if we were able to show that, is Greg was illustrating from the northwest heading towards the southeast, the federal lands, the connectivity of Table Mountain into U.S. Army Fort Carson. What's also not illustrated there is ongoing conservation work, Nation Conservancy, Trust for Public Land, our partners at the Palmer Land Conservancy, Colorado Cattlemen's Agricultural Land Trust, because much of this map overlay for healthy natural systems, particularly if we were to zoom out a little bit and you were to have a larger picture of the prairie lands to the east and southeast, what you'll see is that these parcels we're talking about do play that future connectivity role in terms of making sure we have the elevational gradient from the mountains and the higher country to the west, as well as latitude to the north to south connectivity, all in an effort to make sure we have viable corridors moving to the future. There is no one single property anywhere in Colorado that by doing conservation on that one property solves this problem. This is a process of assembling a puzzle over time. And I can assure you, as a matter of fact, there are projects underway right now that are seeking to actually finish that connection between conservation easements just south of Fort Carson to have a connected conservation corridor to the Arkansas River right now. So the puzzle assembly is in process. Each of these parcels we're talking about are relevant to building that puzzle in over time and making sure that the natural areas of Colorado that matter to all of us today are going to matter to future generations.
So this is the only slide I have on conservation and sort of ecological connectivity. Are there any questions? All right.
I have a question for Matt. When was the Walker or the south? Is that the Walker Ranch? When was that done?
The conservation efforts on the Walker property, which those easements are the brown easements just south of Fort Carson, are part of that. That work started in 1999. The first easement completed on that, I believe, was 2003 or 2004. It started all through REBI programs, but that is now effort that's sort of continuing to shape the family directly as they're looking at generational legacy and succession as well. So that continues to date in total, roughly about 35,000 acres of conservation.
So a little bit on the portfolio context. You've seen this map. The blue areas represent state surface ownership. In general, and here's the Bohart Ranch, the aggregation. There's the Chico and Bohart, some other lands. Since I've been here, which is only about 10 years, and since there's been a lot of focus and a lot of conversation by the board about this part of the state, and 2 points of view. One has been potentially, and we've purchased a lot of land here. In the early 2000s, we purchased the Gray, we purchased the Bohart, we purchased so there was a lot of, we purchased the Chancellor down here. So there was assemblage of lands going on. And there were, in my experience, always 2 points of view about it. One, that there would be some economic leverage and certainly some landscape management leverage to be achieved through owning these large contiguous blocks. And the other was that when it didn't rain on one, it didn't rain on any of them. And we suffered the consequences exponentially. So it was, we should have more, or we should have less. There's always a tension in the conversation, especially when it came to this larger block here. So I'm not gonna, I will show you how this compares. You can make your own judgment. So that's the situation. And you say, well, how does that fit with our statements about strategic plans or strategic outcomes? I'll let you decide. So what our strategic goals say are, we will have a diversified portfolio, both in what we own and where we own it. And that we will make strides to increase recurring revenue. I think those are the two primary sort of headline statements in the strategic plan and other documents. Bill, is that okay? So I would describe the current.
I'm just gonna ask for additional information. Was there a sense that that's where large-scale properties were available? Or, I mean, I'm curious because when I came on, there was a big conversation about how important it was to consider that, property down there, and it's kind of a really big. Part of the
My
vision.
experience, and Bill, you were a little bit of a head start on it. His mindset, my experience is all looking back at the documents and trying to put the asset plans together. So I was trying to understand history. I think a lot of it is opportunistic. Opportunities in Chico in particular, I think is very intentional. Amendment 16 had just passed. And there were these sort of new ideas about landscape improvement and how, over what period of time could that happen, and better integrating the notion of school access to state trust. So that was very apparent in Chico. To me, reading the historic documents, the Bohart and the Brett Gray look more opportunistic, not for bad, I just mean they look like solid, good opportunities to own large ranches that would earn a better return than perhaps the 640s and things, but
Add to that,
and I can't be overly positive, and I'm certainly not being negative to it, I just thought it was. So those are our two high-level goals. And I would describe the current status of these properties as, well, in the portfolio. We've always, since I've been here, we've acknowledged that the land portfolio is eastern heavy. About 65% of our surface land holdings, it's called slide 25, more or less, are almost in the eastern third of the state. So they're of, relatively speaking, a lake type in a somewhat similar geographic location when compared to the non-soil western slope. We do have a large concentration in El Paso and Pueblo counties, and and I think to some extent we've at least had conversations in the past, as I said, about reducing that. One thing about all of this concentration of properties inside this circle is most of them don't have sources of income other than agriculture. They're all primarily agriculturally driven. And so therefore, those yields, that we call the non-extractive yields, the yields off the ag leasing alone generally trail all of the portfolio averages. They're generally semi-arid in character. And as we talk about climate change, I can't predict what's going to happen where it's, I'm not saying change won't affect properties in other parts of the state, but there's generally a consensus that we're going to see changes in the way that snowpack, the way that the runoff comes out of the plains earlier and later, and maybe less rain, maybe more intense heat and things. So you could argue, I guess, that summarize from this, about 65% of our portfolio is going to be subject to a similar kind of climate risk going forward. I don't have a crystal ball. That's sort of staff's assessment of those are the goals. That's the status. That would be good. So you could draw your own conclusions from that. And they may be different.
Well, we're semi-arid now, maybe climate change will become wet.
There you go.
Who knows?
So, in summary, we were saying, from a non-financial standpoint, we talked about the financial stuff, primary executive session, the various ways we might do that. And staff says, like, what's the primary directive here? Well, what's our fiduciary duty to the trust beneficiaries? Under that lens, these are low performing assets financially. We think there are generally limited opportunities to increase returns. I know it's a pretty general statement, but on these 6 in particular, probably true to a general extent. That concept, this one, I think staff is fairly strongly about, but CDs at this scale are not well aligned with the agency's mission. We do use them on our ecosystem services projects, but those have been at a scale of 100 or 200 acres to accommodate a use in which we are well compensated for the placement of the easement. So there's a direct cause effect return thing happening. If they were the disposal would ensure the permanent conservation of these properties. One's in the stewardship trust right now, the others aren't. Stewardship trust is not a permanent conservation tool, it's a management designation. So perhaps argue that permanent conservation would be a better outcome than what we can do or are doing. Proceeds can be reinvested, there are higher returns. And I didn't get into this a lot here, but we heard in September that one of the goals of this project is that we have other partners, and that includes the agricultural community, other cattlemen's, and the goal is to we would dispose of these, it's being proposed, we dispose of these to TPL, TNC, or under contract with the various entities of the DoD. They place a conservation easement on it and then work with cattlemen's and others to figure out how to keep this in the hands of local agricultural operators. That would be a tremendous outcome. That would be sort of win-win-win. So that's the vision. So our staff take would be selective disposal of properties of state trust land via with REPI as the sort of initial lever to get moving is in the best interest of the trust beneficiaries. And you can ask, I can answer questions, our partners answer questions, or we can just have open conversation.
Best interest of national security. I mean, that's the whole.
There are other
All those
outcomes that
other
I-
little things.
I've left out because I try
Yeah.
to. It's the fiduciaries, what's our responsibility, but you're absolutely right. There are other outcomes here that are good in the big picture and bigger picture.
Thank you. Anything else? Anything else you'd like us? Anyone else you would like us to?
I want to. I appreciate that you asked these questions in September, because I think the more we can do to give you all the information you need to make a decision on an action when it comes will be beneficial. We are going to be, unless you need anything else, because we could bring something back in December, just given the timeline associated with some of the funding that is currently in place. And I'm not saying that drives it, but I think the military needs to know whether the conservation community need to know whether we're in or out, so they can make, if we're out, other arrangements. So hopefully if they'll begin start working with us towards execution, we will be coming back in January with an action item asking you for a decision on proceeding to enter into negotiation discussions. I think we talked in September about option agreements that would allow us to go forward with the disposal of these properties to TPL, TNC.
So between, on the timeline between now and then, you'll be doing appraisals and, or I'm sure, just.
Appraisals would come. Where's Matt? Is Matt? Did you want to speak to the timeline a little bit?
Yes, thank you. Matt LaFontaine, position disposition manager. We are still working through some of the timeline concepts. In general, each phase would need to be appraised if there's a multi-phase disposal. And we would seek out those done within a year of the transfer. So I think what we had discussed was potentially a January action item where we laid forth staff recommendation as to what the general structure would look like. Governing these purchase option transfers. but would not have the appraisals in place at that.
Well, I understand. So when the kind of decision process that we would be asked to make a decision, but we would not have the appraisal information till later or?
In general, the concept would be that the board provided approval to notice for sale, purchase option to buy under certain terms. Those terms would be at the net appraised value. Based on mutually agreeable sources.
And how does the percent of diminution work out? Is that just discussed with TNC, TPL, and us, or how does that play out?
Under the scenario wherein we dispose of these properties to the TNC TPL entity, that would not be a driving concern of ours. That would be used by them in their.
It would be them and the DOD.
Okay. We would solely be disposing of properties at unencumbered values.
So just so I understand process a little more. So we would make this decision in January. And if we were to affirm this process, then it would go to DOD and TNC and TPL, and they would work it out. And then I guess I'm still unclear kind of about how the whole process works.
Well, you're raising a good question, and I will try to answer it now. And it sounds like one of the things we should bring back either in December or January is a detailed description process. I don't think I can do it without pictures.
If we want to understand it without pictures, so yeah.
But in general, and I'll start with you. We would ask you to say that you're willing to dispose of these all or some of these properties, as Matt said, under these general terms, at appraised value, in parts or pieces, no, it's gonna be done in multiple tranches, no tranche smaller than X $1 million or less than so many acres. We might, so you would approve that. And we would start negotiating an option agreement with TNC and TPL. So we would then have a legal agreement or an agreement in place with them that says you have an option to purchase these from us. We're going to still have to go through our normal statutory required process of advertisement, solicitation of other proposals. We've got to go through that step. And then we had.
So that would be.
Until December.
And so then if there were multiple bids that came in, those would drop back to the board, but presuming that TNC TPL were the leading bidder of the purchase option sale process, we would enter into a contract with them that would allow over a period of time for them to exercise the state bidder according to these terms.
I misspoke, so I forgot, we switched that. We're gonna be, what we're advertising for the public bid is an option.
Right, and this it would be designed so that REPI funding, the marrying up of the timing of REPI funding being available would be coincidental with the actual contemplated bid transactions. Does that make sense?
That's what I'm watching the expressions.
Yeah.
Why don't we come back in December with a specific discussion about the process with pictures?
And one last question. I'm sorry, Matt, but one with, in the case of the Tanners, the sublessees, when do we talk about their assets that they have on the ranch, their pipelines and?
So our current thought on that is any less owned improvements would be paid or reimbursed to them by the board, and the appraisals would be inclusive of those. So we would pay the lessee, reimburse the lessee, and when we ultimately transact with the property, it would be paid for the value.
Following that, for the lessees, when might they have time certain to know kind of what their future is?
That's a really good question. And
Moorhead, the Nature Conservancy. I want to take one sort of shot at process. I do think it'll be a good idea in the next next couple of meetings to have that written out in a clear fashion. But I would like to take sort of a quick shot at the explanation of why the explanation is complicated. Effectively, the REPI program is a national program. We are not going to secure funds and a lump sum that allows us to execute the entirety of the goals of REPI. It is going to be a phased thing with annual allocations, originally to Congress, and then to the Department of Defense, and then through Department of Defense to the individual branches and installations across the country that are all participating in REPI. So while we are seeing tremendous support and high profile of this program, of this Colorado large scale REPI at a national level, the expectation is this will still take us 4 or 5 years at a minimum to secure all the funds and acquire as we go. So essentially what we're talking about is having a single option agreement between the State Land Board, TPL, and TNC that defines, okay, you, TNC and TPL, get to acquire these pieces from the State Land Board, provided it is at current appraised fair market value and provided that each piece fits within the long-term operational and investment logical patterns. In other words, scale and location of each pieces, of each of the pieces makes sense as we go. So essentially, the option is to define how each thing will occur as funds become available through Department of Defense and then through the conservation partners here in Colorado.
It was better than what I did.
I spend a lot of time explaining this, so.
And then the lessee piece, when the lessee, certainly.
Honestly, to a certain degree, TNC is a lessee currently on the Bohart, of course, our sub lessees, the Canners who have been managing this property for far longer than any of us have been involved. Essentially, they have a similar question. One of the things that we're actually looking to do is when we actually are able to fundamentally answer that question of do we have an option agreement or not, where we can begin moving forward. That's probably the signature thing that's actually going to be able to allow us to work together to bring the most clarity to how does this unfold going forward as each piece goes. How are we dealing with the asset itself? And how are we dealing with the continued legal operational agreement in some cases as they move forward? And then ultimately, when any individual property, we'll use Bohart as the example, when the entirety of Bohart and is the acquisition is completed through REPI, that's where the Tanner family, our partners, the Colorado Cattlemen's Association, as well as their associated land trust. The goal here is, as Greg pointed out, we're going to be working in that interim period of years, trying to devise a strategy that puts our partners in the Cattlemen, ideally in a place where we have a new tool that actually allows for an affordable agriculture strategy to layer in with conservation to try and address long-term sustainability goals for traditional rural.
It's almost ironic. We just spent the morning talking about affordable housing.
Yeah.
Their effort is to try to create affordable ranch. And
It grew out, this is an effort that the Cattlemen and the Nature Conservancy have been working on probably 5 years at this point. And it grew out of really the affordable housing concept, because the concept is really saying from a rural community, where is that direction for key components of that traditional rural community, the folks who actually have that vested interest in living and operating and taking care of the land and those local communities. Where is their vehicle for being able to make sure that they can afford to stay? And so that's really where this grew out of. We've made substantial progress. Actually, our partners, Cattlemen's Land Trust, have actually already put a couple of smaller pilot projects on the ground that we are continuing to learn from. And really what we're talking about here is can you learn how to scale it up to appropriate scale that can work for something like Bohart.
what we did in the interim, the bar lease was about to expire in 23. So we did a 5-year, we put a 5-year extension on it so that the timing of all of this, we don't have to go out and put it up for bid. So we essentially created some space for this thing. I don't know if anybody else wants to speak, so we can move away and.
Is there anyone else? I know we have Alexis here who would like to share their perspective at this point. You don't have to. Oh, come on up. Yeah.
As you can probably imagine, this is pretty scary thing for us to be going through. And I spent a lot of time talking with Matt and other people at TNC and trying to get a handle on this, as well as speaking with people at CCA. And all I can say, I guess, at this point is I look forward to trying to come up with the best solution for us and working with these different groups, that hopefully we can work something out in the end that will be of benefit for everybody. Just on as a side note, just as a lessee, as an ag producer in Colorado, I typically am really against the land board divesting of land. And so that's kind of just always been a fallback position. I think there's a lot of agricultural communities that really depend on these state lands to make their smaller operations work as a whole and stay viable. And so I think the land that the land board holds is very important to those ag communities. Beyond that, I won't keep you. I'll just say I look forward to working with you on the process.
Yeah, I appreciate the comments, and you reminded me of something that we should probably stress more in these presentations. This is not the beginning of some global divestment. We are the state land board, and as staff, we believe in the part that says land, and we want to be the state land board. So as I said at the beginning, this is strategically maybe an opportunity, but it's not the beginning of a
Precedent
No,
necessarily.
no.
where the unions start set of circumstances and then
It's not our intention.
strategy.
I sort of reflecting on this, and this is Commissioner Probe, new to the state land board, so this is only my second meeting to be considering the REPI proposal, but through both of those sessions and seeing the properties and looking at some of the financial analysis from this afternoon on the executive session. To your point, Greg, it feels like this is a kind of a rare and pretty value-added opportunity for the state land board to consider, because it not only offers an opportunity to diversify a little bit from our portfolio with a lot of assets in the east, but it's a divestiture path that seems to offer the most benefit for our desire to also see these lands stewarded over the very long term and to remain in the agricultural community. There are no guarantees for the Bohart Ranch if it stays in our portfolio. And this appears to be a fairly well-reasoned strategy to take an asset like the Bohart and use other people's money to keep it in ag. Simply put, there's no guarantees, but that's sort of how it strikes me. And that's not to diminish that there's a lot of thinking we have to do about this, but overall, seeing the various aspects of these assets, the analysis that the staff has done and the structure, as I understand it, seems to address the risk of, getting halfway through a transaction or putting the motivations for the parties to close on all the portions of a ranch if they start down it. I think we've heard a little bit about the process, but also some of the probabilities associated with the money. So I look at this from a risk perspective as well as a benefit perspective, and not making any decisions today, but thinking about all this, I feel like, Greg, you and the staff have done a very good job of giving us really good perspectives on what this transaction might mean to the state land board with respect to not only its obligations, but also its other assets. And so anyway, all to say that this seems like a pretty interesting opportunity to pursue generally along the lines that you all have outlined. And, you know, obviously we have to see option agreements and whatnot, but if we're voting on the process, that's kind of the main decision I think we'll probably make in January.
Thank you again. Appreciate the presentation and thank you, Tanner, for making the trek up here. It's always nice to see you. I think we'll be seeing you every month for a few. All right, we're going to move on to our next agenda, business agenda item.
Commissioner,
Yes,
oh, this is information, I'm
it's
sorry.
information, yeah. I had to check myself with that too. Welcome, Lindsay. This is related, of course, to our stewardship trust and our previous conversation. In part, so Lindsay.
For the record, this is Lindsay Brandt, Stewardship Trust Manager, and yeah, kind of a different agenda item, but kind of on the same general topic here. Basically, I am here, I'll just wait for my slideshow to get up here. Thank you, Nick. Yeah, so I am a part of this conversation because as we have been discussing, change is coming. And I kind of added the caveat. How do I do my slide? Probably. So I don't want to, presuppose we're starting down this road and I don't want to.
How about change
possibly.
might be coming.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I think I had maybe, and then I got a little more optimistic and I changed it to probably. But if, as we go down this road and we talk through this review process, we do want to be prepared for kind of what that future holds. And so I'm really here just to talk to you today about how we would do that and how we would prepare for these changes in the context of the stewardship trust. So as you know, this board directed staff to work on actually 2 transactions that could ultimately lead to disposal of some good chunk of state trust land. The first of these is the Bohart Ranch there in El Paso County. And the second of these is the La Jara property in Conejos County. Some of the commissioners will recall the April and December meetings from last year, where the La Jara disposal kind of came up working with Western Rivers Conservancy. So this is about 72,000, well, it is actually 72,165 acres between the Bohart and La Jara that are designated into the stewardship trust. So that is 25% of our stewardship trust program. And that might seem like a kind of a scary number, but I'm kind of here just to talk to you about, this is something we can do. And I think it's actually in a lot of ways a great opportunity to look at the stewardship trust portfolio and apply some great science to that portfolio and how we're managing it. So just to, if you haven't figured out already on this map, the blue is our state trust surface ownership, and this kind of orangey gold color is the stewardship trust properties. Just to review a little bit about what the stewardship trust is and isn't. Stewardship trust is primarily a management program. It mostly affects how we manage and use the land, and it gives specific responsibilities in that area. It is dynamic. This board can vote to add or remove land at any time, and it has done this many times in the past. It is also capped at 300,000 acres. And finally, the stewardship trust is revenue generating. Nearly all the lands in the stewardship trust have at least one lease. Most have more than one. The stewardship trust, things it is not, or I guess does not do, the stewardship trust does not end existing uses. So there's nothing in Amendment 16 or in our stewardship trust policy that requires us to eliminate existing uses on the property. Although this board can terminate a use if it feels like that use is in conflict with maintaining the natural values for which that property is designated. On the same point, the stewardship trust does not prohibit new uses. So as long as we feel like those uses protect and enhance the natural values, those uses, we can allow new uses on a property. As Greg mentioned earlier, it's not a permanent protection mechanism. It's not a conservation easement. Land can come in and out of the stewardship trust. And finally, it does not prevent disposal. Amendment 16 actually considered future disposition as one of the potential outcomes for land in the stewardship trust. Also, just to review quickly, we have 7 established criteria in our policy. When I say our, I mean the board's policy, that we call natural values. And these are basically the criteria by which land can be designated into the stewardship trust. I'm just going to run through these very quickly. The first of these is rare properties containing rare plants or plant communities. And how do we know what's rare? We really rely on the Colorado Natural Heritage Program up to CSU. They have a ranking system and they rank most species on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being critically imperiled and 1 being abundant. So the 1, 2, 3 of those are critically imperiled, imperiled, or vulnerable. So species that fall in that ranking would qualify one of our properties for stewardship trust designation. The second of these is wildlife habitat, so properties containing known occurrences of or habitat for rare or statewide important animal species. Third is properties containing or providing views of lands of exceptional or unspoiled beauty. Next is open space, so properties containing undeveloped land of statewide significance. I do like to stress here that we're not talking about what a lot of us who live on the Front Range think of as open space, where we might go for recreation, or the open space behind, a residential area that people like to have. But we're really talking about significant connections between undeveloped tracts of land. So it might be a kind of like that map that Greg was showing earlier. It's a piece that's between, the Forest Service land and Fort Carson or something, or between a large open ranch. Next is land containing important archaeological, paleontological, geological historic sites. Second to last of these is, I just put the word hydrology up here, but what I really mean is land containing water associated habitats. So wetlands, riparian areas, lakes, streams, fens. These landscapes are so rare in our state and they provide so much important habitat for species that either you rely on them for part of their life cycle or just don't occur elsewhere. And the last is properties located within or containing potential conservation areas or PCAs with high biodiversity significance. So PCAs are another data set that is created by the Natural Heritage Program that basically give a kind of scientific assessment of lands throughout the state based on species occurrence, landscape integrity, and these are areas that they've identified as being important for long-term persistence of important species, kind of based on biological and physical factors of the site. And so here's just an example where there's several PCAs overlaid with some of our state trust lands. Sorry, the colors got kind of weird. Any questions about our designation criteria or just the stewardship trust in general? So as a last reminder, when state trust land is removed from the stewardship trust, we are required to immediately replace it with an equal or greater amount. And so that really gets to the heart of why I'm here talking to you right now, is to describe the process or the approach that staff will take if we do end up in a position where we want to replace 72,000 acres of stewardship trust. So I'm going to start just a little bit with the size and scope. The stewardship trust currently consists of 108 separate properties, ranging in size from 101 acres to 43,000 acres, the Beaufort, which we've been talking about. And theoretically, if we dispose of the Beaufort and the Mahara, we could take those 72,000 acres and we could designate them all into one big new property. This is a hypothetical property. I don't think we actually have a property of that size, but that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is we can designate 112 individual 640s. I do not think this is a good idea. We do not want to have 220 stewardship trust properties. I think that would be a portfolio that would be a bit difficult to manage given our current resources, and we'd really just be spreading ourselves way too thin. So I think the best scenario going forward, if we move forward with all of these transactions, would be designating a handful of larger properties and probably a handful of smaller properties. Geographically speaking, as Greg mentioned, our surface ownership is Eastern Colorado heavy. And about half of our state, our stewardship trust properties are in the eastern half of the state, mostly in this kind of greater Chico Basin area. And while representation within that ecosystem is great, and previous boards have had a great interest in the central shortgrass prairie, we're not beholden to that. There's nothing in Amendment 16 that requires us to take out and put in similar things. Ecosystem representation as a whole is nice to think about, but it's not the only factor, and I wouldn't say it's necessarily the most important factor in stewardship trust designations. And we do know that if the board moves forward with this review process, the central shortgrass, or more specifically that sand sage prairie at the Bohart, it's still going to be there. It's going to be under conservation easements. So while it might not be ours being the state land boards, it's still going to be the Boharts as far as we know. And we do have several other large land holdings within the central, I keep saying central shortgrass, but I'm really talking about here the high plains and the southwest tablelands part of the state. We do have other large land holdings in that part of the state that we can also consider. So I'm just going to talk about some of the tools that we would use to analyze our assets and identify future stewardship trust properties. Before I dive into that, I do want to be clear that I don't think we're going to have any trouble finding properties to designate. I think between Mindy and myself right now, just in the back of our head, we both have a handful of properties that we've had our eye on for a while that would probably meet the criteria we good candidates for the stewardship trust. But I do think we have an opportunity to really use some of these science-based tools that are available to us to draw our attention to properties that we might not be thinking about. So one tool that I mentioned before are these PCAs from the Colorado National Heritage Program. The colors don't come out very well here, but they've done quite a bit of research and have identified areas throughout the state with these biodiversity significance. So we look at these areas, overlay them with our state trust lands, and help identify areas we can start to evaluate further. The second data set is actually the one that Greg and Matt were discussing earlier, which is the Nature Conservancy's Resilient Lands Mapping Tool. And it really doesn't show up very well on this slide. But basically, these are, as I mentioned, these are landscapes where there is connectivity between various pieces of land. So sites, the example I like to use is, like, say you're a turtle and you like to go over to this other area and that's where you lay your eggs. If I-70 is between you and where your egg laying site is, like, your life cycle is going to be very difficult and you're not going to have a great chance of success. So landscapes that are connected in terms of the ability for species to move around, that are resilient in terms of future climate impacts, that's what this analysis tool does. And so basically what this map is highlighting here is all of these areas of green and blue have some level of resilience and connectivity throughout our state. And so we have quite a bit of land that overlaps with this area that we can consider for potential stewardship trust designation. The next is hydrologic resource data. So we actually have an abundance of data sets that tell us where rivers, big and small, spatial data on wetlands and riparian habitats, even the types of wetlands. And we can use this both at kind of a broad scale and also at a very fine scale to assess sites for aquatic habitat and kind of look at exactly what types of aquatic habitat are present. The next item we can look at is the wildlife data that CPW does. So CPW has extensive maps on high priority habitats, reproduction areas, migration corridors. And similar to the last slide, we can use these areas. I just put up elk here as an example, but we can identify where migration corridors are across those state trust lands, where they have calving areas, overwintering, severe winter range areas that are important for wildlife in our state. On a very fine scale, we can use the element occurrence data, or the data I was describing earlier from the National Heritage Program for rare plants and animals. They map it on a very fine scale, so we can use that looking at specific properties to really identify if the site has been inventoried, what's on the ground And is it important for us to consider that as potential stewardship trust property? And finally, or I guess not finally, but almost finally, cultural resources. We probably would not do like a statewide assessment of cultural resources. The way that data is managed through the State Office of Historic Preservation, they're kind of complicated to work with on a large scale. But staff does have specific knowledge of certain properties with cultural resources. I believe the board has toured some of these properties, and we can use that as a consideration for some properties we might think about for designation. And lastly, we just have other important factors, the basic practicality of designation in the context of existing leases and commitments. If Ben Teschner has already leased a property for a coal mine, we probably don't want to then put in stewardship trust, basic management approach of the existing lessee, and just the condition on the ground of the property. Finally, local support from staff, the lessee, and local governments throughout the So just to summarize, I think the most important message here is we can do this. I'm confident that we can find 72,000 acres of land for the stewardship trust. We already have some great candidates kind of in the back of our mind, and we haven't even really started this search. I think we should look for a handful of new properties, probably not one, or probably more than one, but definitely less than 50 or 100. And I think we have science-based tools that we can help to identify these replacement properties. Thanks to GIS, we have amazing ability to analyze land in a way we can even 5 or 10 years ago. And based on our, stay tuned. So based on our current proposed schedule that Greg and Matt were discussing, right now I'm planning to come back to you sometime in February to tell you about my recommended properties.
When you say a handful of new properties, is that to acquire or?
Just to designate.
Oh,
So
to
it would be all land that we all already existing state trust plan, but it's just not currently designated. I'm happy to answer any questions or comments that you have. Commissioner?
Lindsay, thank you. So when we talk about hydrology in here, we've often talked about it just as streams. Do we ever look at water rights or that?
Oh, sorry.
No,
More to your question.
under that broad agenda of hydrology?
Yes and no. For me, when I think of water rights, I think of usually that water is being taken sort of off the landscape and used for some use, whether it's irrigation or municipal or whatever. In some cases, I think with like Mindy and her ecosystem services or wetland mitigation baking, a water right would be involved in maintaining a wetland or something like that. But in most cases, this is, water kind of on the landscape in its natural state, if you will. So not being used for irrigation, not being diverted for something, but really in the riparian area or the wetland. So it wouldn't really involve like a transaction of a water.
And I guess the other question I had, I noticed that through the years, they talk about nominated properties that come from outside nonprofits or individuals or anything. How do people do that? And is that always on existing land that we own, or do they ever suggest this is a property we should own?
To my knowledge, nobody's ever come to us and said, hey, you should buy this property and put it in a stewardship trust. I don't know if that's happened. I know with some of our ranch lands that we've acquired, the ranch owner has approached the state land board and said, hey, I'm interested in selling you my ranch. Usually those transactions take place before we really get involved in considering it for the stewardship trust. But yeah, we do accept public nominations. The property that the board designated most recently, the Alder property, was actually nominated by some biologists and kind of conservation groups in the San Luis Valley. So it does happen, and we do look at those nominations and evaluate. But to add on to that, typically, if somebody nominates a property, even if I go, wow, this is a really great property for the stewardship trust, we as a rule don't put things in unless we're taking something out. And that is because we're capped at that 300,000 acres. And so we don't want to keep adding and hit that ceiling. So we tend to, as a rule, only put something in if we're taking something out. Super helpful. I will probably be back to you in February.
Thank you, appreciate it. All right, are we good to keep moving forward? Okay. We're hearing from Julie Majors, talking about Crow Hill Asset Management Plan, and I even know where Crow Hill is, so.
Well, we've driven 285 south, north. Good afternoon, commissioners. For the record, I'm Julie Majors with the real estate section of the statement of board. And I am here to present the information item in your packet. Asset management plans are typically reserved for our large ranches and our more complicated assets where we need to confirm our financial outcome or we need to potentially address maintenance and infrastructure costs and or identify flora, fauna, biodiversity protection issues such as that. So Crow Hill is a very small asset in the board's portfolio. A little unusual for us to be putting together an asset management plan, but it is a very unique asset and it's strategically located. So we hope that as we go through this and if you read the asset management plan packet, we will agree that we should continue to hold this asset. So Crow Hill is in Park County. It is 223.54 acres of the remnant section 16 trust assets. It is located right off 285 south, about 45 miles south of Denver. Property does have great access off of 285. There's Acadia Street here. There's also an exit off of a little bit further south, 285, under the overpass. You would land in the county's ball field here. So the property is surrounded by pretty much large lot residential. There's a smattering of commercial properties up here along Acadia Street. There's some over here. Religious camp right here, and then a county building right here. So I actually have this works. Some drone footage by Abe and Dina.
Oh,
The next here gets you a little bit closer to the property. So you're not standing there. So this is. There we go. All right, so we're standing at the southwest corner, as you can see, 285. You can actually see the access for Acadia Street there. We're headed north, roughly northwest. You can see one of the buildings that we've since demolished. This was captured in 2017-18. So now we're heading a little bit further north, and we went to the east a little bit. We would get to the top of Crow Hill. This is again, this was taken a couple of years ago, and since we haven't been grazing the property, I can tell you that it's even more pristine than this video shows today. It's got beautiful meadows and aspen woods. So we started getting our arms around this property in 2010. When we, looked at it, we've got several properties in the portfolio that we consider affectionately lands in the path of development. And we looked at the existing zoning and we actually got an appraisal. Interestingly enough, the land board had agreed several years ago to change the zoning on this property from agriculture to residential and commercial, which is got 218 acres of residential and 5 acres of commercial along 285. So it's really important for us to understand the condition of the property and when in fact it might need to have a higher and better use, whether or not it would be destined for a transition. So we would consider 2010 as our baseline. At the time, 2010, if you remember what was going on, there was really no reason to take any action from a development standpoint on this property. So fast forward to 2017, and we actually put together our first official asset management plan on this asset. Really, it was a function of wanting to ask the board to demolish the existing structures. We needed to spend about $36,000 to do that, so it was a good time to look at the property comprehensively and understand all of the conditions that were going on. And at that time, we didn't want to do something else with the property. So our analysis, after again getting evaluation and having all of the input from our lines of business, reviewing the comprehensive area plan for the county, that we should go ahead and keep it. So our asset management goals at the time were to go ahead and demolish the existing structures, better secure the property so that we wouldn't continue to have trespassing, hold the property again for future appreciation and revisit the asset in 5 years. So 2022 asset management plan is document in your packet. Again, we go through the same process with our lines of business. We look at the county planning efforts again, and has anything changed? Do we need to do something else with the property? We ordered another value appraisal, and that valuation basically told us that from 2010 to 2022, we've experienced about a 9.15% compound return on the property. So our conclusion is that at the moment, the property continues to appreciate. We don't really have an urgency to dispose of the property and add those funds to the NSE account right now. Your cover letter indicates that we have a pretty substantial balance today, and there's some pending transactions that could add significant dollars to the NSE fund. So this is not necessarily a priority. So we would go ahead and implement the goals for the property. One being economic viability. We'll continue to lease the property. If there's other leasing opportunities that we want to consider, we could of course do that. Natural systems, we want to make sure that we're protecting the natural systems. Our ecosystem services and our stewardship people will have eyes on the property at least every 3 years to make sure that that's not changing. And we want to make sure that we are engaging with the community. That's mostly Park County, making sure that we have cross communication between what's going on with the Crow Hills area plan and the what the land board would like to do with the property, or if there's any new uses that we want to do with the property. We want to make sure. So staff's conclusion today is to continue to hold the asset and revisit the property conditions, get a new valuation, and any other opportunities. Thanks, Todd. Any discussion, comment? There's no decisions to be made, but if you agree with our conclusion, thumbs up. I think
One thing briefly was just, and yes, thank you, Julie, was just that
you just answered it really at the end there, because I was thinking about 5 years, and yes, if curious about in the past number of years, if there's kind of an increasing speed of change likely and increased valuation. So just knowing that you guys will, it's not that you won't pick this up again and look at any change conditions, waiting 5 years, but obviously if there's something that would come sooner, that we would have that opportunity to reconsider. Yes. Okay. Add anything?
Thank you.
I really appreciate the property history. That was just super
I know, it's
interesting
just
to
fun
read.
stories, right? Yeah, this property has a lot of history. So it was interesting.
I think you mentioned there was it Mr. Woodruff? John,
Yeah, John,
that he might have been invited to this
he
meeting.
was invited, and I don't see him. Do you? Yeah.
I was just
He
making
had
sure.
leased the property for Grazer for a number of years when we had it rezoned to residential. The fences are in terrible condition. The grazing lease earns very, very little, not enough to pay for new fences. And so we stopped putting cattle on it, or allowing cattle to put on it a few years ago. He had expressed interest in revisiting that, and we suggested it's just not appropriate. In fact, I think it's really pointed out in the plan. At this point, we've lost the legal ability to graze it because we haven't had cattle on it in a couple of years now.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we're here, that we're giving you the opportunity. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right, we are staff report, and this is a lot about institutional knowledge.
Any questions on the staff report?
No, I think it's good you're looking at this. I'm just gonna open it that way.
Ready for the record? Bill Ryan, director, for the record. Sorry about that. And so if there are any questions on staff report, I've got the next item too,
Yes.
which is 2023 meeting dates. Last month, you all said that the second week of the month, Wednesday, Thursday, seemed to work well for everybody in general. So we mapped out what that looks like on a calendar. That's for those of you who are old school with paper copies, like me, that is page 2 of tab 7. As always, we'll try to be, we know you're volunteers and we try to be respectful of the time. And so we'll compress that down to a single day where we can do that. But we also want to continue to practice getting out on the road and seeing assets and meeting people and being present in the communities where we own things. To that end, I want to solicit your all ideas, if you have any at this time, for tours and things you'd like to see. I've already had our own staff weigh in on this and got a bunch of good ideas from them. For sure, we'll do a water session in 2023. Now that we have a new water manager, it just brings a whole different level of understanding and ways to make the tour interesting. Other, what Greg would have done was stand by the stream and point at it. She's not here. I think we're probably right for another oil and gas tour. We've done some pretty cool things before where we've seen working rigs that had some of the latest technology, what they're doing to make those much quieter, have far fewer emissions. We've been up to the Noble Operations Center where they can shut off anything they own from a centralized place. There are other developments in oil and gas or emissions, so that's probably a couple. We found the whole list together. But I also want to hear what you all want to do.
I was kind of jealous that Ben didn't take us on the mine tour. The coal.
Yeah, I know, he took his own picture all over. the
Yeah.
place.
I know.
Before we go into tours, can I
Yep.
just have a couple of quick suggestions maybe, or
Please.
something for consideration on the calendar? If we know it's one day, the sooner we know that to free up our other calendar is hugely helpful from a work perspective, just to be honest with you, because it's always, they always hate when I have my days blocked. And then secondly, if we do one day, can I put a plug in for Wednesdays? Thursday is tough. That means I stay Thursday night and I go in ski traffic Friday, and I'm just saying all winter, that's not any fun. So if unless there's some issue with that, if we could prefer a Wednesday over a Thursday, that would be awesome for me. That's kind of all about me with that comment, but.
I'll second that. I was
Okay.
gonna say.
Oh,
I
yeah, there's
preferred it,
other
and-
people,
yeah.
there's other people, yeah, exactly.
We're nodding.
Fridays are interesting.
So noted.
That was it.
And Bill, while it's not a tour destination, I really want to say how beneficial I find the workshops to be. So I hope we'll continue those. This morning was great. The ones that we had earlier on water were really excellent. So when we're in Denver, especially to have that half-day workshop on a topic that we need more information about it. They're
Happy to
very,
do
and you guys are
Any
doing.
topic, whether it's in here, we love bringing in outside experts.
I liked how we did today. All right, I guess I have another suggestion. I'd rather have a longer day than 2 days.
Okay.
And I guess I could even start with a 7 in front of the
Ooh.
start time if that's
Mhm.
required. I'll just. put
Or we
that
could
out
go
there.
through happy hour.
And we could go into happy hour. I
It'll
hate to
be
go all the way
intense,
through
yeah.
it,
Choose to zoom in with you and your jammies at 7 AM.
but yeah, you know how good I am at that time of day too. It takes a village to support me, but that'd be, I'm just being honest.
Yeah.
It's
Sure.
my schedule's nuts.
No, this is probably.
And once I'm here, I'm here. I'm recognizing that may not always be possible.
Money can be, excuse me. top. That we may want to do a workshop someplace other than here when we're in our tours of summer. Sometimes there are places where we really get that educational opportunity. And
I use those two terms pretty synonymously and, it's an education session. So whether it's in here or standing on an asset, where that's appropriate. Yes, I understand your point. It's-
On the tour side, you brought, guys, the staff probably brought this up, but maybe if there are going to be recommended stewardship trust parcels. Granted, they could be all over the state, but if there was some sort of concentration, that might be a interesting thing.
Or generally just seeing our stewardship parcels when we're out and about. It's their work on the view.
Yeah, I like that in terms of ones that we have,
Mhm.
and then as Lindsay's saying, she and Mindy have ideas of
We
it.
haven't
It'd be
seen a
nice
lot.
to, before they're even doing the analysis, kind of, what is it that they see as
Yeah.
well? How do they look at these?
I think that's it for me then. We've got these dates published. I'll ask Rachel to send you calendar invites. Does that work?
Yep.
Okay,
Thank
for
you,
everybody?
thank
Great.
That'd be great.
And we can go on to the next part of the agenda. Which I think has been.
All right, our next, it's a request for review with Ben. And again, I'm just checking with folks in almost a couple hours. Do you all need a break or want to take? Y'all are good, okay. Okay. And if you need to, take a break. What's that? Ben. All right, ready if you're ready.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. For the record, this is Ben Teschner, the Solid Minerals Manager. And I'm also have guests here from Fremont Paving, Jody Schreiber, and then John Valari, who are going to talk as part of this presentation. We're here to talk about Solid Minerals Lease 112746 in eastern Pueblo County. This is a sand and gravel mining lease, which is not currently developed. And we're going to specifically be talking about a request for advanced minimum royalty relief on this property. So the question here before you is to reduce AMR more or to reduce AMR less, right? And so we'll talk about the details of that as we go along. For context, this lease is located in eastern Fremont County. Eastern Pueblo County. If we zoom in on this area, you can see that the lease area is shown here in yellow. And this is on a parcel where the state land board owns both the surface and the minerals. It's just north of US Highway 50. And Pueblo is off in this direction. Pueblo, the city of Pueblo. So while we're thinking about this decision, I think it's important to understand advanced minimum royalty. It's not a lease term we see in leases other than solid minerals leases. And what this is these are royalties paid in advance. A set amount paid at the beginning of each year, typically on a lease. And they are held by the land board as a credit against future production. Okay, so in this case, written into the lease is a $25,000 AMR paid at the beginning of each year, starting in this lease year 2022. What this does is, because rent is a fairly low dollar amount, what this does is this guarantees the board a minimum return on a lease, even if no production actually occurs. In addition, it encourages development of that lease as soon as is practical, right? Because by having the lessee pay money up front, you're sort of, if it's unlikely to be developed or unlikely to develop soon, it encourages that lessee to drop that lease so that the board can lease it to somebody else who may be more able to develop it. So that's its purpose. Oh, importantly here is we hold this as a credit, but we will never pay it back. Okay, so if the lease never gets developed, we still keep that money.
Does it carry over to the following year?
Yes, it carries over multiple years, and the board put in our most recent policy put a sunset on that of I think it was 10 years, which is subject to some details, but the short version is yes, it rolls over. So if you pay $10,000 this year and don't develop the lease this year, you still have that $10,000 credit. You would again pay it again at the beginning of the next year, and let's say you start developing the lease in the middle of year 2. You've got $20,000 sitting there that you get to sort of you have to report the production, and you kind of what would you call it? You kind of report down that AMR value, and then once you go over $20,000 in royalties owed, then you start cutting checks, right?
So
Does that
it's
sort of
like a
make
lease
sense?
credit, right? It's a
Yeah,
credit
it's a
against
credit,
future lease
exactly. It's
payments.
against
when they're
future
producing.
royalty payments specific. So is everybody kind of clear on that? I know it's a little bit complicated. Okay, so a little timeline here. This lease was issued in 2019. And the way this lease was set up, which is reasonably common, particularly with solid minerals leases issued in this era, is that the AMR doesn't kick in until a few years down the line. And the reason for that is because we're trying to give the lessee time to get the property permitted without sort of financially penalizing them for that period of time. So in this case, the first advanced minimum royalty payment kicks in this lease year 2022 and carries on for the life of the lease as written in the lease at $25,000 per year. You're here. So what does this look like? As written, the minimum amount to hold this lease is the $25,000 in AMR per year plus rent. Okay, so the numbers you're seeing here are the rent plus AMR. right? And so as written, starting in this lease year 2022 and moving forward, it would cost Fremont paving 26,000 and change to hold this lease. Fremont Paving approached us and said, we have been working on permitting this. We still intend to develop it. We would like some relief from this AMR payments. In the policy, the solid minerals policy, staff is able to grant AMR relief of 50% for up to 2 lease years. And so staff has offered that to Fremont Paving. Under that scenario, the revenues look like this. So it would then take a little less than $14,000 for the next 2 years to hold the lease and then revert to that $25,000 plus rents in lease year 2024 and onward. Fremont Paving is requesting additional relief on top of that, which would be $6,000 plus rent, $6,000 in AMR plus the rent for 4 years, then returning to the lease as written. Right, so you can see that requires that they would pay about $7,500 per year for the next 4 years, and then revert to that $26,000 in year 2026. Does anybody have any questions about this? So if the lease as written isn't really on the table, I suppose you could make the decision to do that if you wanted, but if the board denies the request, which is what staff is recommending, you get this scenario here in the middle. If the board approves the request, you get this scenario on the right. So it's Fremont Paving. Fremont Paving is a lessee that the state land board should be aiming to retain in the view of staff and in the view specifically of your solid minerals. This is a lessee that has a number of leases with us across the state. Specifically, they also have the state pit / 44th lane operation in Pueblo County. And importantly, Fremont Paving has a lot of experience permitting in Pueblo County, in part because they've spent the last few years, including the years where there was no AMR payment on this lease, permitting the much larger 44th lane project, which is also on state land board property. Over the last 3 years or so, that state pit / 44th lane, where we haven't even really seen a lot of production come out of 44th lane yet, that was the 5th largest payer in the solid minerals program. Right, so this is a big lessee, an important lessee, and also a lessee that has shown excellent stewardship to our properties as well. And in addition to the stewardship of the land itself, is a lessee that has spent a lot of time doing the community engagement and stakeholder engagement work that makes our lives a lot easier, especially with the type of work that Fremont Paving does. So. And in my view, Fremont Paving is the best opportunity to develop this lease, and that's important. Now you'll notice that staff is recommending that we deny this request, and there are reasons for that. The primary reason is that Pueblo County is a high demand area for sand and gravel leasing. Very high demand, in fact, probably the highest demand area that we have in the state land board portfolio. If Fremont Paving chose to terminate this lease, we would likely be able to lease it reasonably expeditiously to someone else. It's also important to staff to maintain consistency with other recent AMR provisions. It's been a goal within this program to have AMR of at least $10,000 on our solid minerals leases in order to achieve the goals that I outlined earlier about why we have AMR. Right, and the primary purpose to encourage Fremont Paving to develop the lease expeditiously or terminate the lease. As an example of this, you'll see this is that same map I just showed you a second ago. Right up the road in the area that's now flashing in red is another lease held by Rocky Mountain Materials. And this lease is another one in this corridor of high demand sand and gravel properties. And this lease was signed in a period where AMR in my office had sort of gone out of fashion. And so it doesn't have an AMR provision. And as a result, it costs the Rocky Mountain Materials only $2,500 to hold this lease through 2031. And so the board is only earning $25,000 or $2,500 a year on this lease, and it's sitting there undeveloped. Right? That's not a super desirable outcome from my perspective. So I'm going to turn it over to, is it John Paul or Jody? It's going to talk a little bit more from their perspective, and you have the floor.
Thank you for your time. Thanks for allowing us to come talk to you. We've been here before on a previous project with some of you may remember the 44th Lane project that he's talking about in Pueblo County. That is you guys own about 50% of that project. And so we've been involved in this AMR conversation since it was, it's envisioned. Not totally in agreement with the policy. We don't think that particular policy fits all applications of what we're doing. I understand the land board's position where the example you just showed where you can sit on this property for 30 years, $2,000 is not a positive outcome. I guess as far as our request, we're not that far off of your $10,000 goal. Along with our requests, we don't interfere with. There's ag leases on this property, and I think most of them are just cattle leases, and we have no interference with that while we're trying to permit it, and very little interference with it while we're mining. So there's that, and there's a small amount of income with that as well. But the largest reason we're asking for this consideration is, he talked about permitting the other property. And the reality is, we are the last people to permit anything in Pueblo County for the last probably almost 30 years. It took us 23 years in excess of $1 million to permit the last property. So it shouldn't be that way. It's dysfunctional. It's not, there's nothing about the American system that it would say it should take you 23 years and $1 million to permit a piece of dirt. But it's the reality of what happened in Pueblo County, and we're still facing those same kind of challenges. So to pay the AMR and a $25,000 AMR, along with the money we're trying to spend to get the project off the ground, is painful. And at the end of the day, it's not a loss to the state land board. Once the ground is permitted, the state's going to get the same amount of revenue. It's just you're going to get it at a later in life. So it's, if you choose to give us a concession, it's not that the state is going to be losing that revenue. You're not going to be getting it today. You're going to be getting it, a later date. But that's really the main driving force behind it. Is we just feel like it's too. Well, we feel like it's maybe not unfair. Maybe we don't like it and you guys do like it. It's strictly a concession because it's a lot of money as time goes on. We're trying to permit the property. And it's not per se just permitting the property as it is. We got to build relationships with all the neighbors and everybody that has anything to do with it. In order to get the permit off the ground, we got to get all the buy-in from everybody. And you cannot do that in a year or two. It takes 23 years to do the last one. So other than that, I think he explained a lot of the points.
Is the problem at the county level or at the DRMS level?
Strictly county. strictly county. And quite honestly, it's not even overly complicated. That county is set up where it has a planning and review board that's all volunteer, and they have the authority. Most counties are set up to where that type of board is a recommendation, and then the county commissioners weigh in. And this county is set up for that planning and zoning board, volunteer board, makes a decision and you have to appeal to the commissioners. So it's really kind of the crux of what causes all of that.
Thank you. I'm curious, so to date, how much have you all spent in terms of trying to get this thing permitted? And secondly, are there any other operations that have been permitted, sort of that are competitive to you near and around this general
There
area?
has absolutely not been gravel pit permitted in Pueblo County for, we permitted the last one. And prior to that, it had been, pushing 30 years since I permitted. The Rocky Mountain Materials property that he showed the picture of, they granted them a permit, but they put so many contingencies on it that Rocky Mountain Materials said, no way. We'll just sit on it and wait for the political environment to change. So we have been working on the relationships around it. A lot of the times it's the access controls our destiny. We have to have, and what really plays a big role is there may be a special use permit, an old grandfather special use permit that's permitted that borders the property. So you have access through that special use permit to that property. That's the particular case with this one. There is an older pit that borders this property that we're working with the landowner. And once we get that agreement in place, then we'll be able to move forward permitting.
No, you can go first.
So I noticed you didn't pay AMR from 2019 to 2022. Were you permitted during that time?
No, we were, we didn't, the AMR is kind of a new thing. We also had leases where you didn't have an AMR. I don't know when, probably 22 or probably 20 is when they come up with the AMR. We've had leases.
Business is about revenue for schools, right? But let me ask another question. Does that mean that there has not been any permit in Pueblo County? Where do people get the materials for construction?
They're hauling it in, and they're old pits that have been mined out. So there's a pit that's you guys's that's we're the operator of, called the State Pit. And that was one of the primary sources. We have other sources in Pueblo County, but we're mining them out. They're gonna, and I'm sure you probably understand this, but these type of alluvial deposits only last so long. They're different than, like a quarry on a mountain. There's millions and millions of tons they can mine. These alluvial deposits are, they're like a 5-year, 10-year, 20-year, and then they're exhausted. They're gone. There is no more sand and gravel in them. And as the Pueblo market goes, all of those pits are going farther and farther away. All of the closer pits are mined out, and they're moving out farther away from the center. The other big change that happened is all the different legal issues with water and water law. Most of the gravel pits in that area come along the Arkansas River. And the value of that water is so great that you cannot afford to mine the sand and gravel in the Arkansas River. So that whole region, all of the bottom ground is pure sand and gravel. But you really can't mine it because of the cost of water. So you're going to these outlying areas where these mesas are.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for being here today and for speaking to us. Certainly as a housing developer, I certainly understand long delays with permitting and all of the work that has to go into, you know, getting community support and other things that you have to do with these processes, and that, that, you know, you can try your best and there's sometimes that you're just kind of, it's just taking as long as it is. And that there is money involved in that. With that being said, I'm trying to balance a few things. So taking Commissioner Keith's point as well, in terms of kind of, there's already been a number of years, and now this is when, you know, a known time when the AMR would kick in. I also naturally, if I'm given two options, I'm like, well, wait a second, how can we put these together? Or what, like, is there a third or a fourth way? So I'm curious about understanding that you need additional time, or that's what you're requesting. I do feel a bit at a loss, and listening for Commissioner Probst's question as well about how much, you know, how did you get to the $6,000 number? Like, how does that help necessarily? And is it at all possible that there'd be maybe 2 years of one amount and then ramping up to another amount and then getting to the
I would
whole?
love to tell you that we have a mathematical formula that we can show you how we got there. I'll be honest with you, there is no mathematical formula. It is just, we are a small family-owned company, and trying to, you know, the people we compete against are number one, number two, and number three are the largest in the entire world. The Martin Marietta property you're talking about, they are the number one or number two largest producers in the entire world. And so we don't have the resources they have. I mean, maybe $25,000 a year for them to hold that property. They were lucky enough that it's only costing them a couple grand, but that kind of money doesn't matter per se as much to some of those type of corporations as it does the family operation. So I don't have a formula. I can just tell you, we thought we could afford to spend, you know, $6 grand plus the rent, $7-8 grand a year to hold it till we can get it permitted. And would I rather it be none? Absolutely. I'd rather it be, hey, I'm gonna permit it. And you'd be happy with that. But I understand the state landlord's position. We need revenue coming in, and quite honestly, we spent the first couple of years, we had this lease, we were still trying to permit 44 Lane. And it was an exhaustive effort by numerous people to get that thing permitted. And in the short, we went in front of the county 3 separate times over 23 years with 3 different routes of access in and out of the property in order to get it permitted. And you have to put all of those pieces of the puzzle together. And, you know, it just don't happen that fast. We're dealing with farmers and ranchers, and they don't really like our industry anyway, but they understand it, and it takes a little time sometimes to convince them that it's not going to be the end of the world if they let us cross their property or something and put a deal together. And generally, ranchers and farmers don't like to move fast, and you know, you need to build the trust with them. And we've been in the valley since, you know, my mom and dad started in '68. We've been in the business and up and down the Arkansas Valley that long. So we have relationships with people that we can get the, you know, the pieces of the puzzle put together. But honestly, I don't have it was just, it's less than 25,000. It's less than 13,000.
Understood. So then with that, if I can have a follow-up to Ben, is that, sorry, or do you have
May
something to add on?
I think it's 2 more slides and then
Oh,
that
okay.
maybe may illuminate just
Okay,
this kind of wrapping this portion up and getting to the discussion. I'll add to what John Paul said about 44th Lane is in addition to all that stakeholder work, you also did a fair amount of wildlife work as well with CPW on that project. But anyway, so here's your recommendation, which I think you already understand. The staff is recommending or deny this request. And the result of that would be the 12,500 for the next plus rent for the next 2 years. And I'm going to toss that up there since it's typically there for your discussion period. now.
So, yeah, if
I'll
I
try to
can-
bring, maybe we can bring John Paul upstairs.
Bring Colbert into our study.
Jordan, she'd like to be here as well.
So along these lines, I'm thinking, okay, the standard policy is staff can offer 50% reduction for 2 years. Here, we're being asked essentially for a variance from that policy, and that it would, but on 2 factors, right, on both time and the annual amount. So, and understanding that we're not sure exactly what the timing would be, tell me if I'm wrong though, in that understanding this is to have an advance against future credit, but also making sure that we are mitigating, right, against the risk that we're counting on certain monies to come in now, and if there never are other royalties, this is money that we'd be holding, and so making sure that we're not completely giving up funds if this never comes to fruition, right? That's kind of the key balance that I'm trying to make. Okay.
The other part of that argument is the skin, the leasing is getting more skin in the game as life goes on. And as much as 6,000 or 7,000, and I guess all of it is just the 6,000 would be the AMR. The AMR is money we see as like a prepaid, we see as a prepaid royalty. And as that grows, we become, well, I think when we finally got 44th, when we started the 44th Lane project, there was no AMR. So we didn't pay an AMR for 23 years. I don't know whose idea it was, but somebody come up with it.
I'll say, well, for the record, it wasn't mine, it was.
This is stolen, this. But, we come up here and ask, we didn't like that then either, and they worked with us to some extent, but at the time we got that deal done, we had, I think it was $85,000 prepaid. That if we couldn't have got it permitted, it was going to go away, but we did, and so it worked out.
So I think where I'm leaning is just that understanding that, and yes, you have incentive built in to make this work, but at the same time, you don't have full control of whether that happens, right? So 4 years is feeling a little scary to me in that way, so that's why my initial thinking is if we would go with that, or just trying to think through something, that it's 2 years of a smaller amount, and then going back to kind of what our policy, the half where we were for another 2 years, and then if it's knowing, so that we can see kind of where we are at that point, and if there's still an issue, we can discuss that, or the board can discuss that at that time. But I'm feeling uncomfortable with just a firm commitment today of 4 years at this fully reduced amount, given that it is kind of cutting in half what we had essentially thought that we would get. So, but I want to hear.
Oh, just a reminder to introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry.
Commissioner
Just for the
Pro,
record.
Ben, from what you've described in this process, if the lessee here were to terminate the lease, hypothetically, and you were to lease it to someone else, there would probably be 2 years of no AMR, is that right?
Similar, yeah.
So there's,
And
so,
yeah, there would certainly, I don't think, for example, if let's say Fremont Paving elected to terminate this lease tomorrow. I don't expect on Friday I would have another lessee for you. So that would be, there'd be delay both in leasing. I think somebody would appear initially in the next year. And then in addition to that, we would likely have a discussion about, hey, this isn't Pueblo County, it's taking forever to permit things, right? And then we would, that would be a likely scenario.
so from today, it does seem that there would be a gap in income, for sure.
Absolutely.
My
I think I can say that was.
Yeah. My second question, or maybe not a question, thought, building off of Commissioner Clark, is thinking about, this is really about risk, sharing, and that's why we have a strategy, right, for the AMR. And wondering if
if there is a couple of years along with that idea that's lower AMR, whether or not there's sort of, if everyone's successful, there's more rent for us later. So sort of rearranging the risk where the upfront is less risk-free financially, but if we all win, there's benefit for us.
Yeah,
little
truthfully,
later.
that's, you're 100% correct. I mean, we're in it together, like it or not. It's how it is. And, you know, if we're making zero progress whatsoever, your people's gonna know it. You're gonna know that we're not making progress, or you're gonna know that we are making progress and there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Jody's got me.
See Commissioner Chavez.
I'm just curious, this is Commissioner Chavez, on the, just out of, in Pueblo County, is there issues or the reason maybe they slow play approvals is because of the history of not mitigating when they're, you know, finished mining? Is that part of it, or?
There is absolutely that everywhere in the state of Colorado. You know, I don't know exactly. I've been doing this all my life, and I can tell you, pre-85-ish, there was virtually no permitting, no bonding. And the first bonding that they put in place of the reclamation was not correct. So we went through this cycle of, if you're old enough, you've seen gravel pits started, dug, finished, left, and never reclaimed. And there's plenty of people that still see that, feel that, and think that's how the world works.
They're everywhere out there.
And so that's certainly part of the problem. Obviously, you guys understand that it's not that way anymore. Reclamation is enforceable. They've got 99% of all of that fixed. But you have the contingent of people out there who just don't want to believe it. And when you have, it sounds crazy, but when you have a volunteer board of
Yes.
7 to 9,
We would do that.
they all have an agenda. Every single one of them has an agenda. And they're not necessarily interested in the science and information. They have a personal agenda. It makes it difficult to get anywhere.
And there are, I mean, there's scars below Pueblo Dam along 50 that are just were never reclaimed. And I know a water augmentation group took over some of them,
Oh, yeah.
and they're going to be on the hook for millions. And
Yep, and the reality of it is the need is great. And these same people who are stuck in that mindset of what has happened in 1960, they don't care about the need. As far as they're concerned, they can haul gravel 100 miles. It makes no damn difference. So you just got to weigh that all out, and it takes a while. I think it's better now. I think that there's some strong county commissioners down there now that are trying to improve the process, and I think it's gonna be better.
Well, if I may speak, Fremont paving is one of the awards for reclamation work. And so we try to even, that was part of this discussion that John Paul was talking about with the neighbors, allaying their concerns. What's this gonna look like when you're in process? How do you, tamp down some of those issues? We do that. And then how's it gonna look when you're finished? And so we try to provide them that, but that takes a long time to do some of those, as well as planning members and county commissioners. Let them know that, hey, the thought that you might have in your head from 20 years ago is not how it's going to end up today.
Mr. Scanlon, I have a question for you as a chair.
Okay. I'll try.
As to what a motion might be that captures some of the things that Commissioner Clark and I were putting forward.
Well, that would be up to you to make one. Obviously we have a board order you can work off of. Or Ben, if you have a
Well, if I may,
suggestion.
I mean, I sort of anticipated you may get. Alternate order underlined. Now, this is binary, right? One is approve versus reject, so I don't have the
Right.
middle. If you guys
Yeah.
want to kind of massage the middle, you're on your own. But the bits underlined are kind of the changes from the other one, and the fundamental difference is this one approves the request. of the other one.
Yeah, and I guess I want to be clear, we prepared it. We still, as staff, endorsed the first one. We didn't, we were,
Yes.
okay.
Trying to help.
I just want to ask a kind of an equity question. Have we permitted other sand and gravel in Pueblo County?
Fremont Paving recently completed the permitting in 44th Lane, which is also in Pueblo County. That's the one that John Paul is referring to. That took the 23 years.
23 years.
23 years. And certainly from my perspective, that was a enormous success. And you guys see a lot of things put in front of you, but Commissioner Heath may, and Commissioner Clark and Commissioner Scanlon may remember, and Commissioner Chavez, I can't remember whether you're here or not, but we had where we combined the two leases in Pueblo County into a single lease. I can't remember which commissioners were here for that, but that was 44th Lane and the State Pit coming together. That was up as Fremont Paving's lease because of that permitting action. They were able to achieve. It's kind of a natural.
To help you with an idea, just give you an idea of what it took to do that, we had to build relationships with the property owners in between the sites and obtain easements and actually purchase property and build 5 miles of private road out of our pocket to connect the two properties, just to get the first ton of gravel out the gate.
Well, and as you know, it's a little bit of cost of doing business in sand and gravel that everybody goes through a very difficult permitting process because folks don't like the truck traffic, they don't like all the other things. So I do know it's also cost of business. Hard to say that, but I can say the veteran of 100 of those hearings.
Absolutely.
I can try to create a second alternate board order on the fly, just to, for consideration.
In the form of a motion.
In the form of a motion. And Ed will tell me. That's right. So I would say, after consideration of the materials presented and testimony given at its regular meeting of November 9th, 2022, the board determines that it is in the best interest of the trust to deny Fremont Paving's request to reduce the AMR to $6,000 for 4 years. However, is that okay? The board believing that Fremont Paving represents the best opportunity for the board to develop this property due to the company's experience and position in the local construction materials market. The board moves to reduce the AMR to $6,000 for 2 years. At which time, I guess that's it.
For 2 years.
Yeah.
Anything else substantive?
Well, yes.
Can you take a time out and just talk about what you want your concept to be and then maybe craft?
It
a
was
motion?
actually both. I realized I was just okay, here's what I want to say. Reduce the AMR to $6,000 for 2 years. Followed by $12,500 for 2 years after that. And then going back to the full AMR, starting in year 5. With any amounts that were deferred in the first 4 years. Then not being credits, but rather being additional payments owed by the lessee to the board.
I'm struggling to understand the very last.
So that's where it was, this was to the point that
It
to the
wasn't-
extent- sorry, you.
I'm saying, it wasn't, there was a credit, it was more that if the base rent here is help me out, 22, oh, that's the Rocky Mountain. Anyway, it was to add on to the base rent, not to not make it a credit.
Well, I was just saying, right now, the funds are credited to that.
Yes,
And it's
and that's okay.
Credited
And then
to
we add
what?
on to the regular rent.
the difference, I see.
Yeah, in the year production.
Yeah, so are we returning to this, to the release as written at, I believe it's year 2026?
I think the point is making sure that we, to the extent that we've deferred something earlier, that we're actually making that up.
We'll need to know later.
You're
But I
not really
thought-
reducing,
That's what I
Your
thought too.
AMR,
It's just
you're
the advance.
deferring payment of the AMRs until later. That's
Gotcha.
what you're
That's what,
suggesting, right?
I was gonna restructure it.
yeah, you-
But we'd get them in the form of royalties. And the idea being that you're permitted by then.
right.
Right, so the
I'm-
rent, what the payments are no longer rent once production starts. Is that right? They're
It's not-
It
royalties.
never is. It's
There's
just
two different
royalties.
buckets here. There's the rent, which I believe it's either $1,480. That gets paid every year as long as Fremont Paving holds this lease. That so that goes directly into the revenue bucket.
Okay,
Um,
so we're good. So we're taking out that last piece.
Yeah. it's 'cause the very-
I think you need to start.
I better start.
Well,
Start
yeah.
fresh. Yeah,
I think it's fine to be fleshing out what you want here to propose before we wordsmith. it, or-
right, but we're done. It's just
Okay.
2 years of 6,000 and 2 years of 12,500. And then in year 5, shifting to the standard lease terms. And everything else below that is written.
So, point of information, in other counties, I mean, I'm also interested in the equity of this. Where would we be with AMR on such a request?
If you sort of picked up this piece of property and this lease and moved it to, I don't know, someplace else, Wilbur County, or whatever, is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Well, we did a similar sized one in Huerfano County, which is just south. And the AMR is a little bit lower on that one. I believe the base is $10,000. It did start at year 0 though, so they began making payments on that at the beginning. The gravel demand in Huerfano County is a fair bit lower than it is in Pueblo County, so that's represents the difference in value from there.
It's where I'm coming from, and I'll just explain this. I'm really sympathetic here where you are. At the same time, I feel like the problem is with your local board, and for us to try to remedy that feels like isn't really fair to others. Our ultimate goal is to have revenue for the school trust, and it's sort of the cost of doing business is how you get permitted, and I'm trying to reconcile my sympathies for where you are versus trying to really have in place a reasonable policy that other sand and gravel people will look at when they come to us and also ask for some kind of relief on permitting.
I can understand that argument too, that in that exact same argument or conversation is every year that goes by, this gravel gets closer to the market feasibility. Today, it's still 30 miles east of Pueblo. We're mining in the heart of Pueblo today. So with the world we live in today, with, $5.50 fuel, every mile matters. And as these gravel sources get farther and farther out of town, the feasibility of them ever being mined becomes less and less and less. It's just,
Construction needs it.
it needs it, but they're not gonna pay. I mean, it's what it costs to move gravel in a truck is insane compared to a few years ago.
And just to note, we have another lease with the land board in Cheyenne County. We just did. We were able to permit it within a couple of months. it's got a $10,000 AMR and a $3,000 rent on it, which was paid. But because we knew we were gonna be very successful and very rapidly be able to have a site for a construction project for us. So that's the big issue, is that I understand the whole equity piece, but Humboldt County is its own monster, and they've created their own monster to where you can go to Oregano County or Cheyenne County and get a permit in a very rapid pace, because those folks there very much understand the industry and the need for it. Whereas Pueblo County kind of puts up their own roadblocks not to have a highway construction fund, but anyway.
I think my concern with all of the discussion, kind of where we're at or not at, is we're dealing with, we're a little bit boxed in. You're who we have, and I think you mentioned we're together for better or worse at this point in time. I agree with Ben. There would be a gap of some significance versus the reality of when royalties can start to actually flow, which is really, really what we want, honestly. And that you kind of came up with a number. You know, so I think we're also kind of coming up with a number, and I'm not sure that's the right way to do business with all of this. And I understand the precedent setting, you know, equity question, but I also think we're kind of more than halfway down the path together. And so how can we get to the finish line in a way that allows you to continue moving forward and doesn't restrict us overly, you know, with a constraint of a 6,000 or even a $13,000 number, or whatever it is that you guys kind of just made up candidly. So I was actually fairly comfortable with your first proposition, because I think we're just all in this. And I don't mind modifying it to 3 years and then revisiting it rather than guessing at 2 years and then it goes up to whatever number. I think the unknown quantity here is Pueblo, and if they're going to move or not. If you come back in 3 years and you're still at the exact same place, which I really hope is not the case, then I think we really have to have a different conversation. I mean, at some point, this either is going to really go or it becomes, you know, just not feasible for you all to continue to spend money on something that may not be realized, or for us to tie this property up. I just feel like we're not there distinctly one way or the other, and I'm not exactly sure how to reconcile it.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all. I heard Ben say his goal would be 10,000. We're at 7,000 and change. The other point I'd like to make is the gravel industry is market driven. And it don't matter if we had all of Pueblo County permitted to mine gravel, there's only so many tons going to get to market. So it's driven by all the housing, all the construction, everything that we all consume every single day. But if we had 100 gravel pits permitted, it's only still, 1 million ton a year market. So just because you permit a gravel pit doesn't mean we're going to get any gravel out of it. There is that trade-off. That is a gamble. That is exactly what you're talking about. You know, it's a gamble and it's a risk. And if we could permit that pit tomorrow, nothing says we're going to be able to drive 200 grand a year worth of royalty out of it. The market is going to control that. And as the pits that we are operating, we're supplying, we're probably supplying 70–80% of the gravel in Pueblo County, the market, of the entire market. And as our gravel pits exhaust, these other sources will ramp up. So, I mean, it's just that whole.
I get the push pull of all of it. We want your royalties. You're not guaranteeing royalties because the market's going to decide that to some degree. But in the meantime, we have this issue of what is the right payment that we feel is fair, and what's the right time frame that we feel we can live with while this conversation has to be continued.
So Madam Chair, may I rescind the motion that's on the table?
You may do
Make a
whatever you would
simpler one
like.
going forward to see if there's a second or a friendly amendment to that.
Awesome.
So after consideration of the materials presented and testimony given at its regular meeting of November 9th, 2022, the board determines that it is in the best interest of the trust to Can we just amend their request? Or do we need to deny it first?
To amend and approve.
Yeah.
I don't think you have, just tell
Yeah.
us what you want.
I'm just trying
And we'll
Yeah, I
make the
think
order.
you just. I don't think it's critical that you deny their request.
Yeah,
I think if you just
Deny
say.
or Approving. were the
Yeah, that's what I
words that were
Yes, those are
necessary.
the binary. that were-
Yeah.
I'm gonna Put a variation on there. I think
Okay,
you
so
could
the
just say
variation-
what you want.
So the variation to start is that it would be 2 years at $6,000 and then returning to the standard lease terms in year 3. That's.
Okay, so what I would suggest in wordsmithing this is best interest of the trust to approve a reduction of the AMR to $6,000 for 4 years. Or I'm sorry, to 2 years.
And that's it.
And I think, yeah, I think that's all you
If
need.
you didn't want to do the next two at 4.5, then
Yeah,
We
just,
can have another conversation.
just ending it with that.
Yeah.
So that's the
Split
motion on the
baby.
floor.
I mean, we're countering a staff recommendation, so then I'd like your perspective if you have any. on
I think
this.
that's reasonable.
Let me suggest maybe something. What if we gave the basic concepts to Ben and ask him to work with them to implement something that reflects what we have raised as concerns? Is that, I mean, because I feel like we're sort of seat of the pants deciding, you know, what that
I
number ought to
think the
be.
only thing different than the staff recommendation is the timeframe. At this, after all of the back and forth thing. And if Ben can live with that and you all can find a way to work with Ben on this, it does give us a chance to bring this back in a couple of years. We're just buying ourselves some time, recognizing where they're at currently in their static
And
situation.
recognizing that you've been a good partner and we
Absolutely.
appreciate the chance to work with you, but.
I,
Yeah,
I'm comfortable with what's being proposed, but you know, I appreciate you, Commissioner Heath, raising the question. That was my first instinct. Why don't we go, this may not be ready, but I think I can live with where we're at with the conversation.
I want to ask one clarifying question. We do, as you're describing, the policy is, Southern Minerals policy is written, gives staff the ability to grant AMR relief without coming to you guys, right? For up to 50% for up to 2 years. which is what we saw. Should we get to at least year 2024, is your expectation that if there is any AMR relief, that it comes back to be in front of you? Or if Fremont Paving comes and says, we're doing pretty well, we think we can do it. You know, we have a discussion and they say, I think you give us 2 years at that 12.5 now, I think we can get there, right? That I'd be able to grant that myself, or would you like to see that?
I think the intent is exactly that. If you got 2 years at this reduced rate to see if you can kind of make this thing move forward. And if it needs to stay a reduced rate, you have to come back. Did I capture that where y'all are thinking? Okay. Yeah. All right, so we do have a motion that essentially amends the board order as presented to a 2-year term instead of a 4-year term. We have a second.
second.
All right, motion from Commissioner Clark, second Commissioner Broke. Let's call a vote. Commissioner Chavez.
Yes.
Commissioner Heath.
No,
Commissioner Fro.
Yeah.
Commissioner Clark.
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. That motion passes 4-0. All right,
4-1.
4-1, 4-1. Yes, thank you for that.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Good luck.
Thanks.
All right. We have just, we have, I think, three final action items. You want a little stretch? You guys
No, I
want-
said we're on the home stretch.
I thought we're,
Yeah,
on the-
let's
I was
just
gonna
plug
say,
through.
so you didn't- I'm feeling good.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go ahead and move forward with that. And this is Boulder County Local Government Direct Exchanges, that tab 9 in your packet.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Matt LaFontaine, Acquisition Disposition Manager. Today I have the Boulder County Local Government Exchanges in front of you. This is a follow-on item from our June meeting. This is for two direct exchanges with Boulder County. And as you may recall, those are treated a bit differently than our traditional transactions. While we still have public notice requirements, we do not solicit bids, we do not sell these in a competitive manner. Rather, we partner with local governments to directly transfer properties within these investments. So we really think that this is a win-win for both the State Land Board and Boulder County. Boulder County has operated these properties under lease for a very long time. Howell Valley Ranch since the 90s and Bald Mountain since the 1970s. They're both integral parts to their open space program. And completing a transfer will ensure that that remains the case and that they remain served in that capacity for the indefinite. As you may recall, Howell Valley Ranch is a little bit north. Bald Mountain is a little bit south of Boulder County. A zoom in of Howell Valley Ranch shows you its relation to Lyons, south of Lyons. Our parcel is this red configuration here. You can see that the surrounding green area is the remainder of the Howell Valley Ranch open space park. Our parcel, and we could call it that for a bit longer in the year to transfer it, is really the heart of this park. And in fact, the trail system zigzags all over it. It's kind of one major route in, zigzags all around, and then kind of out and around. But it's a little bit flatter, especially on the western half of a lot of the topography here. And it's just absolutely gorgeous area that managed to escape much of the fire damage.
Show them how close the fire came and well, where it did actually
Yeah,
improve.
really, there's a little bit of fire damage now on the west along the south border, and then this area is entirely. Our Bald Mountain parcel is located west of Boulder, right up Sunshine Canyon Drive, which you see runs through the middle of it. This is the much smaller piece, and what's left of a section 16, that's the original state land grant. You see there's a kind of crisscross X down here. That's an old patented mining claims, which this area was covered with. Importantly, the owner of those claims was involved in the suit with the board. That recently resolved to the satisfaction of State Land Board and Boulder County, such that Boulder County is ready, willing, and able to move forward with their acquisition. So different than some of our other disposals, given this is a direct transaction, is we're kind of marrying up two different public processes, both on our side and Boulder County side. So I wanted to just give a quick timeline of what has transpired to date. Certainly the planning for this goes back much earlier than this June. We have been under a rec lease that contemplated an eventual transfer with Boulder County since 2015. We've had numerous letters of intent that have gone back and forth in that regard. But in June of this year, I brought an action item to the board requesting that you approve us to initiate this transfer process. Part of that is obtaining an appraisal for each property. So we did that under mutually approved scopes of work with Boulder County, such that we would not have to reconcile appraisals at the end of the process. Those were completed between June and September. In October of this year, Boulder County Open Space went to their POSAC, their Parks and Open Space Advisory Committee, and obtained their endorsement for these transactions. Their last step will be next week and go to the Boulder County Commissioners and seek their formal final approval for the transfer. But here we are at the end of kind of the arrow. We are in our final approval request to our board. Part of the statute that drives this transaction process is to also provide the opportunity twice, once with the initial approval and then once on the back end for the public participation or public. So that requirement is met for today's meeting. These have been considered separate and distinct transactions. The board has authorized 2 local government transactions per fiscal year. And they will continue to be treated that way, but they may both close at the same time with the decreased development of Bald Mountain. Boulder County is hoping to acquire both of these by the end of this year. So should I obtain your approval today, next step will be going to contract with Boulder County. We've already mostly negotiated the terms of that contract. They've commenced their due diligence. They're working on their environmental site assessments and standard title work and other things. Perhaps most important information that I can deliver today is the results of the appraisal. Hile Valley Ranch appraised at $18,000 an acre. Bald Mountain appraised for $21,454 an acre. And you can see the aggregate values based on their acreages of 10.55 million for Hile Valley Ranch, 2.8 for Bald Mountain, and the totals. We had, as you'll also see up here, a column of the appraised values for mineral non-development agreements. The board today, as a practice, will typically issue limited term, no surface occupancy agreements as opposed to non-development agreements. And that has been a shift, a move that the board has made over time. When we first were designing this transaction back in 2015, I think, and subsequently, we have always told Boulder County that we would go forward with a long-term 99-year mineral non-development agreement, which best fits their model at the appraised values. So the appraiser determined these values. They're not state land board determined, but the appraiser did consult with our agency. Creating this. Boulder County preferred to purchase the mineral rights outright, but we're precluded by statute. So this is the solution that seems to work well. Are there any questions on the results of the appraisal values?
I have a question that perhaps relates to that. On the Bald Mountain property, there's a separate parcel just north. And how many acres is that?
That's approximately 40-something acres. It's
Right.
not currently within the boundaries of their open space park.
Right.
However, they are purchasing it for that purpose.
So I'm curious about what will happen to that, because there is residential development along there, and at that price per acre, that's a valuable piece.
It is any of the land that's involved with this will be a part of their open space park.
It will, even the north parcel? Okay,
As I understand it, based on conversations with them, it will not be subject to residential. Nor can it be based on their agreement source of funds. So some additional considerations. I mentioned that today would be the final board approval, allowing us to move forward with these transactions. The rec lease dating from 2015 had a concept in it where payments in excess of $175,000 per year made by Boulder County would be credited back to them at closing. Part of my request today is investment development authorization to pay that credit. Should the properties both close by the end of this year, and it'll be a little under $464,000. Just to allow some flexibility with timing, I'm asking for approval not to exceed what it would cost to pay that credit should they rent both properties from us through next calendar year, which is a little under $530,000.
Basically, that's the AMR concept that was applied to the rec lease.
And then I talked a little bit already about the closing timeline, but they are eager to move forward quickly, and we're hopeful that they finalize this by the end of the year. With that, there are 3 parts to my recommendation, and the board order tracks, so I'll hit them briefly. But It is for you to provide the final approval for the direct transactions at the appraised values that I shared, to approve the issuance of a 99-year mineral non-development agreement at appraised values, and to approve the expenditure of IND funds not to exceed $532,500, sufficient to pay the payment.
For modification, do these funds then go into that NSC bubble?
They do indeed. And the statute allows for up to 2 years for us to redeploy those into other real property assets. Otherwise, they automatically transfer them.
Madam Chair, I'm prepared to make a motion.
Fabulous. I can't see you, but I hear you.
I do want to do this motion, but before that, I want to make a statement that disposal is not something that we take lightly, and that this is going because it's a compatible use for an entity that's willing to make payment. So just for the record, to make certain this is not our sell-off day.
I would add, there were some lessons learned in all this for us as a board, where we're going to be, have our eyes a little more wide open when our property starts to become really public space, and what that constrains us to actually over time. So I appreciate that. All right, Commissioner Heath?
Madam Chair, I move that the Boulder County Local Government Direct Exchange Board Order be approved as presented in our packet.
Second. All right, we have a motion, Commissioner Heath, a second, Commissioner Clark. We'll call a vote. Commissioner Chavez?
Yes.
Commissioner Heath?
Yes.
Commissioner Brown? Yes. Commissioner Clark?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. That motion passes 5-0. Thanks for all your work on this. It's been a process. All right, we're gonna move on to our next. Oh, you know what? I did not ask, and I want to make sure that if there's any comment at all, I would do the vote over. Do we have any, there's no public comment here, but is there any online?
My apologies for missing it. Anybody online, if you'd like to make a comment to the commissioners on that last item, please use the raise hand feature. I don't have any hands.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. All right. Now we are moving on to Justin Osborne with an IND request.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. For the record, my name is Justin Osborne, South Central District Manager. My presentation will be very quick, so much so I have not even prepared a PowerPoint presentation. So, this is under tab 10 in your packet. Today's agenda item is just a extension. I'm asking for an extension for Board Order 2017-67, which was to approve funds, IND funds for infrastructure improvements on the Chico Basin Ranch. So that was in 2017. We have approximately $325,000 of the $640,000 left to spend. We have done a lot of work to the corrals, roofs on the houses. We've got some fence projects, cattle guards. We are in the middle of a big pipeline and water tank project right now, and then have more advanced plans planned for this winter. So, and as you all, I'm sure, are aware, we have the RFP for the Chico coming out this next year. So we would appreciate the remaining balance of these funds to finish the projects as we move into that RFP and into that selection process for the next list. So I'd entertain any questions.
Justin, Commissioner Grove here. Curious, since there had been delay in getting it done, is there an assurance that it makes sense to try and wrap this up before going through the RFP process? Do you have some assurance or? belief that
Yeah,
will happen?
I'm working with the current lessees on these projects that we have going on. Honestly, this kind of snuck up on me. I didn't realize we were right here getting so close. So we've had these projects kind of planned, and it's been somewhat of a struggle getting fence work done. Not necessarily on the lessee's part, but just getting bids and finding the time throughout the year for the work to be completed. So we are working together and staff and I are working on a couple other things, maybe to spend some of the money on to that, some upgrades going into the new lease.
Any other questions or
I
comments?
just had one, just clarification on this. Are you, because on page 6 of 9, your recommends the board approve the use of up to 640,000, but you're only asking for the 325 that you haven't spent.
Just the remaining balance.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, any further discussion with the commission? We'll turn to public comment. We have none in the room. Is there any online?
Folks listening online, please use the raise hand feature. Yeah, we don't have any comment.
Okay. We do have in our board packet a draft board order. I don't know if it's up on the screen, but it is the last page 9 of 9 under this tab. If someone would like to make a motion.
This is Commissioner Chavez. I move the board approves the investment and development fund request, board order 2017-67 extension, Chico Basin Ranch, as written in the.
Second,
Thank you. We have a motion, Commissioner Chavez, second Commissioner Heath. We'll call a vote. Commissioner Chavez.
Yes.
Commissioner Heath.
Yes.
Commissioner Grove.
yes.
Commissioner Cook.
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. That motion passes 5-0. Thanks, Justin. Always nice to see you. Thanks for coming up.
Yes, the no.
All right, now, Greg. And this was the ad we had sitting in front of us today.
Afternoon, Commissioners. Greg Gokish, Assistant Director. We added at the last minute, actually after the board packages first published another item. I could borrow some of Justin's story here, but we've been working, as you know, for a long time on trying to advance the Dow Junction property up in Eagle County, and that the opportunity for advancement came relatively quickly recently with the governor's office putting some money in the requested budget that would help relocate CDOT. Bill and I were up in the valley in September, meeting with representatives of some of the local jurisdictions, had some really good conversations, and also met with some developers with experience in the valley. And the question we posed to them was, what can we do that would add value at the time we seek development partners? What can we do to create additional value for the land or optimize the value that the land board might realize, will realize at the time we actually put this project out to RFP? And the answer was that we could do some preliminary planning, start to get a little more certainty around what it would look like, what uses might be included. And the local jurisdictions that we met with really leaned in on that, said we would really like to participate in the process with you to help identify what those what this might look like and how workforce housing is, what role workforce housing plays. So we then met with a number of consultants and have them all teed up and ready to go. And I realized we don't have any money assigned to this project. So we'd like to get them started immediately. We have a civil engineer, a planning consultant,
Geotech.
and maybe a geotech. We can get weather cooperation under contract. And then that would allow us to be prepared for some further conversations with jurisdictions in the early spring. So what I'm asking is, so with the late realization that we didn't have a budget, what I'm asking for, what I thought I was going to use is a $300,000 set aside of IND funds that we make every year. And that can be used at staff discretion. It turns out we've expended most of that already, so it's not available. We will come back next month with 2 sort of requests. Nick will, I think, be coming back with some requests around that $300,000 bucket and some ideas about how we might change the way that works in the future. I will come back with a more complete explanation of everything we're doing on Dow Junction, what the total investment we might ask for would look like, and what the total schedule will look like. But in the interim, and to get these consultants started, I'm requesting $150,000 of investment in development funds to get the ball rolling. And I can answer any questions. I suspect I can answer any questions.
Director Ryan.
It's not a question, I just, if it wasn't clear, we want to get in the queues with the people who are doing the work for us. And Greg wants to be able to, we want to be able to sign the contract as soon as we can. In order to sign them, we need to know we have committed funds. So we're asking you about that today. In December, we're going to come back and give you what we think the next 3 years looks like. I think there is a visioning process. We've got to sort of build a straw man for the community to then begin to react to. We need to make some big decisions about, should we annex into Avon, or should we stay in Eagle County, or should we annex into Vale? How many parcels of development do we think will come out of this? That helps us decide, do we want a master developer? Do we think we could handle putting out RFPs to individual developers for parcels? Should we be a seller or a lessor? Where's the bridge go? All of those things, we need to kind of do the planning documents for it. And so we'll come back and give you how we think the next 3 years looks next month. But today, we just want to get enough money so we can sign the contracts and get in queue with the service providers.
We have talked extensively about wanting to see this happen. That will take a little money on our part to make that happen. I understand. Oh, we have a motion coming from Commissioner Pope.
Consideration of the materials presented and testimony given this regular meeting, November 9th, 2022, the board determined it's in the best interest of the trust to approve the use of up to $150,000 of the investment development funds for consultants engaged in the Dow Junction State Trust land planning work. Yeah. That's the motion.
Yes. Motion, Commissioner Pope. Do we have a second?
So the board delegates authority to the director to take appropriate action consistent with the board's decision.
Second. And second from Commissioner Clark. We'll call a vote. Commissioner Chavez.
Yes.
Commissioner Heath. Commissioner Probe.
Yeah.
Commissioner Clark. Yes. And the chair votes yes, that motion passes 5-0. Go forth and spend some money.
I'll give you a lengthier discussion next month.
All right, we, I think, are down to the board leasing agenda. Welcome.
Good afternoon, commissioners. Good to be with you in person.
I was just gonna know.
Andy Bissett, transactions and service. We have the November board leasing agenda for your review and approval today. There are 2 items on the agenda this month. One recreation bid and one recreation new lease, both from the North Central District. Any other questions?
Any questions? Do we should probably ask for public comment. I'm trying. I'm really.
Members of the public, or Mr. Kevin Knapp, if you'd like to make comments about this agenda item, please raise your hand. And the board will hear you. And no hands.
Okay, great. Let's have a motion.
I move to approve the board leasing agenda for November 2022 as presented in our packets.
All right, motion, Commissioner Clark.
Second.
Second, Commissioner Chavez. Let's have a vote. Commissioner Chavez.
Yes.
Commissioner Heath.
Yes.
Commissioner Brode. Okay. Commissioner Clark.
Yep.
And the chair votes yes, that motion passes 5-0. And I want to just acknowledge how well we're doing with time. That we've really pulled together this afternoon. All right. Does anyone have any changes to the minutes that were presented in our packet? Okay. All right, with that, minutes are approved by acclamation, and I think that
Want a
is
sneak
all.
preview of December?
Yes, and by the way, well, it's not sad, but I am flying to Hawaii that afternoon
I
at
just came
noon.
back on Sunday.
Oh, lovely. We should talk. So I'll be there. My intent is to be there the first part of the meeting, but I'll probably have to turn it over to you, Josie, and I'm very, very sad to miss the lunch. This is the best thing we do all year.
Sneak preview of November, excuse me, December. It's a single day. It's Thursday, December 15th. Sorry, I didn't know, but that was the day we could get the
I
Grand
have a
Humphreys
counter
Mansion.
on my iPhone that says Maui. 1 month,
There's a
6
counter.
day, 19 hours.
Okay.
We didn't consult with each other, but yes.
So we'll start that morning at the regular time. And the meeting will be at the Grand Humphreys Mansion, just a few blocks from there. We'll give you directions. We've got some business to take care of. A lot of it's internal. We want to do the annual stewardship report out. You know, we do a huge amount of work around stewardship. It's way beyond the stewardship trust. And seeing all that aggregated every year just really reminds me that we have balanced those two sides of our mission, revenue and stewardship. And so Mindy's gonna give you the year in stewardship. Next, I'm gonna talk about the revenue side. What we did last year, we had an all-time record year. The first quarter of this year was an all-time record quarter. So we'll look ahead for the following year. Again, you guys are financial fiduciaries also. And so we owe it to you to present the numbers every so often. We will have every line of business leader available. As you know, we're organized around lines of business, sales segments, think of it that way. Every one of those has someone who's a leader of that business. They've got a business plan that's a 5-year plan. They give an annual readout on, here's what I did this year. Here are the lessons I learned. Here are the changes I need to make to my plan. Here's how I'm tracking looking forward. And so an opportunity for you to look at us by business segment and to see the great folks we have that lead those businesses. And then we'll have the annual holiday lunch. We give awards, Commissioner Frobe, to several staff members every year for outstanding work, and then to outstanding partners in 4 different categories. And they will be present at this holiday lunch. And then at the end of the lunch, we send everybody home. One other thing, I missed this one. We were talking about the Bald Mountain piece, but our legal team achieved a great milestone last week. After 8 years of lawsuits with Mr. Phillips, we came to the end of the road. We won, and our team persevered. And I want Ed and Corey to take a little victory lap. It has not been easy. It has tried all of our patience, and they've done a great job chasing this through all levels, up and down state courts, and we got tacked over into the federal court for a while and got it kicked back. But I just want to give them an opportunity to tell a little bit about that makes the sale of both Boulder parcels at the same time possible. So sneak preview in December. Anything else?
This is our,
I think it'll start right now. It looks like it starts at 8. Yeah.
this is our first in-person one.
Yeah.
We didn't.
We did
do
it
it without
virtually last
masks.
year,
Yeah.
We still have masks on.
Say a little bit about it.
If there are any other questions, you can bang the gavel.
Oh, we're starting this tradition. We're
There
doing.
we go.
And just a quick thought, Bill, I think it'd be nice if you invited the former commissioners to
I
our
was just
holiday
thinking that.
lunch.
Yeah, I do that. Great.
And isn't there the Mike Bloom Stewardship something or other?
There is. Yeah, we give the Mike Bloom Stewardship Award. Yep.
Mike Bloom, that would be nice.
She's terrific.